Okay, and we are on air. I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Lunenburg Zoning Board of Appeals. I will refresh everybody on way the hearing will proceed. I'll give a notification first that the hearing is being recorded in accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access. It's also on Facebook Live on Public Access, Lunenburg Access YouTube within 24 hours. And I believe tonight we're going to also have Zoom. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there any number they have to give with that?
I was able to get the link on the town calendar,
Okay.
it was on the agenda for tonight. That
Okay. And with that, I can tell you that this is a continuance of a hearing on the petition of Pondview Commons, Comprehensive Permit, LLC, Pondview Commons. The homes at Arrow Estates, LLC, owner Kevin O'Brien, 18 Casimir Street, Andover, Mass. 01810. The property, which is the subject of this case, is located at 318, 390, and 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. 01462, known as Pondview Commons, Assessor Map 6, 17, and 17, parcels 24, 20, and 34, respectively. The applicant is seeking a 40B approval for a comprehensive permit for the purpose of developing 200-unit apartment community at 318, 390, 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. The Zoning Board of Appeals will consider authorizing the comprehensive permit. We have received some correspondence. Tonight, at the last hearing, we said we were going to discuss traffic, and we were going to get some legal briefs, arguments on the water and sewer. And also, one of the first things I'm going to bring up also is fees. We did get a lot of communications. I'm going to read some of the communications that for tonight's hearings, which is traffic. First one I got is from the Leominster, and it's to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Proposed development at 318, 390, and 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. Dear Lunenburg Zoning Board of Appeals members, I am writing you on behalf of Dean Mezzarella, Mayor, City of Leominster, regarding the proposed 200-unit housing development designated as Pondview Commons and located at 318, 390, and 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. There is great concern about the potential impact of traffic caused by the proposed development on Route 13 headed through Leominster. There is already a burden on traffic on this road, and adding a significant number of vehicle trips to this area could be detrimental to the quality of this transportation corridor. As the authority on reviewing and approving this proposal, the Mayor of Leominster strongly encourages you to consider requiring a MEPA review and a full-blown traffic study that measures the impact of the additional traffic on Route 13. We appreciate your consideration of this request. If you have any questions or need more information, please feel free to reach out to me, and that's signed by Elizabeth Wood, Planning and Development Director. I also have one from the Mayor of Fitchburg to the Zoning Board of Appeals, proposed development at 318, 390, 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. Dear Lunenburg Zoning Board of Appeals members, I am writing to you regarding the proposed 200-unit housing development designated as Pondview Commons and located at 318, 390, and 400 Howard Street, Lunenburg, Mass. We at the City of Fitchburg understand that there is a housing crisis in the region, and we need to build more to meet growing demand. That said, we also believe in density in the right locations, in other words, smart growth. This does not seem like smart growth and appears to be in an area inadequately suited to support such density. We join the Mayor of Leominster in strongly encouraging a MEPA review accompanied by thorough peer review traffic impact stormwater management studies. Before a project of such great scale is developed, we need to be confident in knowing that this development is occurring in an area that can support it. We appreciate your consideration of this request. If you have any questions or need more information, feel free to reach out, and that is signed by the Mayor, Stephen Donatelli. I believe that's right. I also received some correspondence from the Fire Department, the Lunenburg Fire Department, Chief Patrick Sullivan. It is to Alfred Gravel, Lunenburg Zoning Board of Appeal, comments on O'Brien Project, Howard Street. In response to requests for comments on the above project, I respectfully submit the following concerns, impacts for the fire department. Call volume impact. Based on the number of units listed, the closest comparison in town is Emerald Plate's Lunenburg development. We would estimate an average of 75 additional calls for service a year. Approximately 70% of these calls would be expected to be EMS related. Keep in mind that an average EMS call takes the duty crew out of service for 1 to 1.5 hours from time of call to back in quarters. This can be over 2 hours if the incident requires transport to point of entry facilities like UMass University campus in Worcester. Fire suppression sprinklers. The large buildings as proposed will require sprinklers under mass fire and building codes. While not an issue if water is supplied from the Lunenburg Water District, there still needs to be a plan for fire protection if this does not occur. This could be from, but not limited to, a private water supply system or a fire pond with pump systems to support the sprinkler systems. Fire protection, water supply. This is closely related to the above comment. If municipal water is supplied to the development, then there should not be an issue provided proper pressure from firefighting is supplied. Elevation from existing water district lines could be an issue and require a supplemental pump. If water is not supplied from the Lunenburg Water District, there needs to be a plan to support both the sprinkler systems plus firefighting operations. Peer review engineer. Given the size and scale of the proposed buildings, we would request the services of a peer review fire protection engineer paid for by the project to assist us with the inspection and review of the sprinklers and fire alarm system. We have had this on Emerald Place, Rogers Way, Tri-Town, Lunenburg Center projects, and found it to be of invaluable assistance. We also have got a lot of feedback from the planning board. Let me find that. And I'm going to read, they have submitted a lot on a lot of things, but I'm going to read the part tonight that pertains to what we're going to be talking about, which is traffic. The development of the 200 residential units on 20 acres in the Howard Street area will have significant impacts on the road network that currently serves the area. The width and geometry of the existing road network that services the proposed development site is not proper to handle the increase in traffic that will be generated from the proposed development. Howard Street itself has several horizontal and vertical curves which create areas of limited sight distance and variable width, creating potential conflict zones. This potential for conflict only increases with the addition of significant numbers of vehicles and drivers who may be less familiar with the road and area. These issues are worsened by the width, grade, and geometry of New West Townsend Road. This road is one of two ways that one can access Howard Street and would be the most likely path for people to travel to Fitchburg. New West Townsend Road is narrower, has less consistent width, and has a greater number of horizontal curves, creating added hazards for the increased number of vehicles that will be introduced because of the proposed development. As mentioned above, the increase in traffic in conjunction with the current width and geometry of the roads is a concern for the planning board. These potential issues are also present for residents who choose or are forced to walk. The added traffic on a variable width road without sidewalks creates pedestrian hazard. This would be further magnified by the presence of other vehicle traffic and things such as bicycles. The necessity of people traveling Howard Street and adjacent roads by foot, bicycle, other human-propelled manner or transportation is more likely due to the lack of access to public transportation in the area the development is proposed. Should the proposed Pondview Commons development be approved and constructed in functional nature of Howard Street will be altered. Currently, Howard Street is a local connector road that serves 50 homes. With the addition of the proposed 200 units at Pondview Commons, never mind the remaining 100 lots at Arrow Estates, the functional use of Howard Street will change to a collector road. This road will handle conveying traffic to and from the development at Pondview Commons rather than being a road that residents use to access their homes. This shift is often represented by a higher rate of speed, more delivery vehicles using the road, and added visitor traffic. These items in and of themselves are not inherently negative. However, without a road of suitable grade, width, and geometry, there is an increase in the safety concerns for all of those who travel the road. The Planning Board is apprehensive about the suitability of Howard Street as a collector road. The current configuration and construction would likely require significant improvement to safety and appropriately handle the traffic increase associated with a fourfold increase of housing units and the associated traffic. There does not appear to be any consideration for the impact of construction vehicles on the neighborhood or the wider area in general. In constructing a development of this size and scope, what is the expected construction traffic? Will the applicant require oversized equipment that needs to be scheduled delivery times to not conflict with the safety of those traveling in the area? What will be the impact of the continued use of Howard Street and other town roads for the movement of heavy loads of construction materials to and soil from the site? These, in combination with the overall impact of the safety of traffic in the area, are items that the Planning Board feels should be addressed. And that's what they have on the traffic. And so with that, I would remind everybody that we will invite the applicant up. If you come up to the mic, you will please give your name and address. The applicant will have the opportunity to do the traffic review, which they have submitted, and present any more comments or submission of any additional documents. Again, you'll please come forward to the mic and give your name and address. Board members will have the opportunity to ask questions they might have on the application while you're at the mic. There will be a public comment period. You will please come forward to the mic, give your name and address, and please address all comments and questions to the board. And with that, I would invite the applicant. And the first thing I would like to talk about is fees. I gotta find out what I did with it.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Don Bornstein. I'm an attorney. My office is Johnson & Bornstein. We're located at 12 Chestnut Street in Andover, Massachusetts, and I represent the applicant. With me tonight is Kevin O'Brien, the principal for the applicant, and also our project engineer, Wes Fleece.
Okay. Again, I'd like to address the fees. You know that you have put down a $1,000 minimum fee. And we do have a fee structure, and we feel at this point we need to discuss the fee structure. And as you know, there are two parts to that. There's the general administration and process portion, which is $200 per unit. And then there is the technical planning review and process fee, which would be 51 to 100 units, 25,000, with an additional 10,000 per 50 units. 25,000 plus the additional 20 is a total of 45,000. That's for the peer reviews, and I know you're well aware of that. So if you would like to discuss that, when you plan on submitting the fees?
Sure, I'm happy to discuss that, Mr. Chairman. We did request a waiver of the filing fees. We did that by letter as suggested in your regulations. The reason we did that, and we sent it along with the payment of the minimum $1,000 filing fee, as spelled out in the regulations. The reason we did that is, as you just explained, the filing fees for this application, according to your local regulations, would appear to be $85,000. There's no equivalent for that filing fee for any non-40B, any non-affordable housing project in the town. The HAC regulations, the state regulations on 40B are very clear. You basically can't gouge affordable housing projects with your filing fees, and that's what your regulations do. We asked for a waiver of that, and we're happy to discuss what a reasonable filing fee would be for this project. We're also, of course, willing to fund appropriate peer review, and would like to discuss that during the course of tonight's hearing as well. So your filing fees, I think, are just clearly excessive and can't be imposed on the project, but we're happy to discuss what a reasonable filing fee might be. I can point you to your 40R fees. So you have a 40R district. Your 40R fees for this project, I believe, would be $4,500.
Okay. So is that what you're proposing? You want a waiver of the fees? That's what you're asking for?
We would like to handle it with the board as a waiver, so something we both agree on, the board and the applicant, on a number. The 85,000, I think, is clearly not supportable. And I point to the 40R fees because that is an instance where your fee structure in town does have an established fee for multifamily housing with affordable component, and that filing fee is $4,500, not $45,000.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to point out that the 40B is different from the 40R, and we do have the rules and regulations, and, they've been in existence, I think, since 2017. They clearly state that, you have a $1,000 filing fee plus an additional $200 per unit. So, you're asking us to throw out the rules and regulations. Our job is to enforce the rules and regulations.
I hear that. I think you've got a state regulation that would say your local regulations are not enforceable because you don't impose those things on non-40B projects. And projects of a similar nature, I point to the 40R because I think that's the most equivalent, and you have a dramatically different filing fee. So that I would suggest the board take a look at that. I've cited, I believe, the regulation. I think I provide a copy of it in the 40B application, and I cite it in my waiver letter. And the state regulations on fees that can be imposed on comprehensive permit projects, I think, are very clear. And your fee has to be both reasonable and can't be more than what you charge non-comprehensive permit projects. And this is neither of those. So we'd be happy to pay a reasonable fee, but we don't think the one stated in the regulations is reasonable. We think in fact, we think it's designed to dissuade for comprehensive permit projects because it is quite high.
I believe the last 40B, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, was in 2014, and it was Lorden on Whalum Road. And I'm not sure what they paid in the general administration fee, but I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000. And you're asking to come in here with a bigger project, and you want it for, what'd you say, $2,500? $4,500.
Yeah, I ran the calculation under the 40R project that has a base of 750, and then I believe it's 25 per unit. Excuse me. Yeah, 25 per unit after on anything above 50 units. So your 40R fee is like this. It's $750 for the first 50 units, and then $25 per unit for the next, in this case, 150 units. That's where I get the $4,500.
Any comments from the boards on fees?
I'm not inclined to waiver the fees, Mr. Chairman. I think they're clear. They have the rules and regulations. Those are in place. Our job is to enforce that. I mean, maybe, I'd like to hear from counsel what he thinks in terms of whether that's enforceable or not. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, but if we had this in the rules and regulations and someone, it passed muster, legal muster, is it applicable?
Would you like me to respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So for the record, Adam Costa, Town Council. So I think that to understand what's being requested, we have to talk maybe for a moment big picture about Chapter 40B and how Chapter 40B projects, comprehensive permit applications differ from other applications that the zoning board typically receives and reviews. Under Chapter 40B, and you may know this already, and some members of the public may know it already, under Chapter 40B, an applicant can seek waivers from otherwise applicable rules and regulations. So while your point is well taken that your job as a zoning board of appeals is to enforce the town's bylaws, to enforce the rules and regulations of the board, and in some instances to enforce state law, under Chapter 40B, there is a process whereby an applicant can seek waivers, permission to deviate from those bylaws, from those rules and regulations, not just zoning bylaws and zoning rules and regulations, but any local rules, regulations, bylaws that could apply to the project. That would include, of course, your regulations, your fee regulations governing the application fee that must be paid. Now, with most waiver requests, and you've received many of them for this project, there's a lengthy list of waivers that have been requested in connection with the development of this project. With most waivers, I would advise you, and I do advise you, to not take action on those waiver requests until the latter part of the public hearing process. You need to hear the applicant out on the merits of the proposal. You need to conduct your peer reviews. You need to even discuss potential conditions before you then consider whether it's appropriate to waive provisions of your bylaws, provisions of your rules and regulations. This is unique, and not unique in the sense that it's never occurred before, but it's unlike the other waivers in the sense that it's the application fee, and the application fee gets paid at the outset of the application process. So what the applicant says is correct. The applicant has the absolute right to make a request of your board to grant a waiver of the application fee. Now, what's the test? How do you determine whether the waiver is appropriate or inappropriate? Well, it's really subject to the same test that would be applied to any waiver. And that test in the first instance is, does the waiver render the project uneconomic? And that would be if this case were to be litigated before the Housing Appeals Committee, which is the state agency where this project will end up if your board denies it or conditions it in a way that is unacceptable to the applicant. The HAC and then later the Superior Court or the Appeals Court or the Supreme Judicial Court are going to apply the same test. And that test in the first instance is, does the waiver denial, if that's what you're contemplating, requiring the applicant to pay the full fee, does it render the project uneconomic? And that doesn't mean the developer makes zero. It means the developer makes less than what the state considers, pursuant to a formula that they've got that is ever changing, whether or not the project is rendered uneconomic in the eyes of the state, in the eyes of the HAC in the first instance. And then if it is rendered uneconomic, the burden shifts back to the municipality, to the town, to establish that you have local needs that supersede the effect that waiver denial in this instance has on the project. So it's a complicated test. It's unlike any other test that your zoning board of appeals applies under Chapter 40A with variances or special permits. It is unique to Chapter 40B. So that's a lot of information. Bottom line with respect to fees is the applicant does, to an extent, have a leg to stand on when it says this fee is different than the other fees that are applied in the town of Lunenburg for other types of projects. And comparing this project to, let's say, a 40R and the 40R fees is a permissible comparison. It's a similar comparison to the sort of comparison that the HAC might apply in saying, are you treating, is the town of Lunenburg treating 40B projects differently than other sorts of projects, market rate projects, affordable projects? And if you are, that's impermissible. They will look for disparate treatment, and if they find disparate treatment, they will not affirm a heavily weighted application fee. Now, having said all of that, I think that to say that this is an $85,000 application fee is a bit of a misconstrual of how this fee is actually determined. So there's an administrative portion of the fee. Administrative portions of fees, whether it's for 40B or for any other type of application that the town processes, is meant to reimburse the town for really the cost of processing. It's going to take some time to process this application. You have binders that are put in front of you at every meeting. Somebody's preparing those binders for you. Somebody's making copies of the materials. It costs money to print the materials on the paper that is in your binders. It costs staff time to produce the binders for you, to circulate via email the correspondence that's received between meetings. You're entitled to be reimbursed for those costs through the imposition of an application fee. My recollection is that application fee is roughly in the $45,000 range when you apply the calculation that is in your rules and regulations. There is then a peer review fee that is separate and apart from that application fee. Those are monies that get placed into an escrow account, so your board can hire consultants at the applicant's expense to review its consultant's reports, the representations it's making to you. The HAC and the Superior Court and the appellate courts have all upheld the use of escrow accounts for those purposes. And I've seen escrow accounts funded with $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, and that's all that's needed to review a project. I've seen escrow accounts funded with $150,000 to review projects. That just depends upon the complexity of the project and the extent of peer reviews. So I do think it's important to look at those fees separately, because I think you have much greater leeway and flexibility and the ability to impose a higher dollar value on those escrow accounts if you do in fact need the peer reviews to be completed on the information the applicant's submitting to you. The cost of processing the application is a separate calculation, a separate fee, and would be viewed differently if there were an appeal of a denial to waive the full fee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'll just, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll just note again, the applicant is willing to fund peer review, the last portion of the fees that Adam's referenced. All we've asked is what I would usually expect in any comprehensive permit, is that we're able to see the scope of the peer review, we understand what peer reviewers you're hiring, and that, and then we come to an agreement on an amount to be deposited to fund those peer reviews. That's typical in my experience for comprehensive permits. What's not typical is to require a very large sum deposited up front without knowing what peer review you might even want. Once we know what peer review you want and some scopes of peer reviewers are solicited, budgets are set, then the applicant will most likely fund those.
Okay. Then on the general administrative fee, I think $4,500 is nowhere near. Like I say, the last 40B, I know it was somewhere in the $25,000 to $30,000 range. So I don't see that. On the technical planning review process fee, that comes up to $45,000 I believe, by our calculations, for us to hire engineers and peer reviewers for all the different things that are going to come up along this hearing, which I think are going to be great. So I guess I'm asking for your feedback. If it's a concern about the upfront money, the only way I think we could help you is if on the technical planning review, rather than the $45,000 complete upfront, you could say put $30,000, and then, but when you got down to 10, you would have to replenish that fee. Do you know what I'm saying?
You're still talking administrative fees right now?
No, I'm talking on the
peer
technical
review.
planning, just to, if you don't want to put the full 45, I'm just saying we don't know, and we have to give back to you whatever we don't spend. So if you put in $45,000 and we spend 25, we have to reimburse you the 20,000, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm just saying, if you don't want to, if you're concerned about the entire sum being too much at this point, we'd be willing to work with you on that to have you say, okay, put in $25,000 or $30,000, and when it gets down to, say, $10,000, you must reimburse it, or we'll stop the hearing.
Yeah, so I think we're pretty
Does
close.
that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fairly close on the peer review fund. The applicant, of course, is willing to fund peer review. All we want to know is what peer reviewers you're hiring, what's the scope of work, what's their anticipated budget.
Right.
And what I would usually expect in a project like this, with the issues that have been raised so far, is we'd be looking for peer review for traffic and a general civil peer review. So I'd expect those two would be the two peer reviews that are sort of front-loaded. And you'd go out and you'd solicit a scope, maybe from peer reviewers that the town already has relationships with. We'd be able to see what those scopes are and then the budget that the peer reviewer gives it. In all likelihood, we say that sounds fine to us. There's a budget set for those. We add up those budgets, we deposit the money, and where your peer review is off and going, and we're hoping to get to a meeting where that peer review can be discussed. I mean, that's the process I've often seen used. It's similar to what you're saying. If those numbers add up to $30,000, then it's $30,000. If those numbers add up to 10, then it's 10. And if you decide you need another peer reviewer, there was a fire safety peer reviewer mentioned in the fire department memo. That might be another peer reviewer that we get to a little bit later in the process. But I think that's I think that's a reasonable process. The board's entitled to some peer review, but the applicant's also entitled to know what that is and have a sense before we just cut one large check and you go off and do whatever you do, to know what that peer review is and what the scope is. That's all we're asking, is to engage in that process. We're not asking to deny you your peer review ability. We think it's important for a project like this. Of course, a project like this doesn't get approved without some peer review. We just want a process like that to take part in.
Okay, so right now, what is the client? What is he offering for the general?
For the administrative fee?
Yes.
I think the 40R fee. I mean, that's what I think is the most
I
appropriate.
personally don't think that's reasonable.
I personally
Town.
disagree with that. I think you got to look at it in the totality, right? You represent the applicant. You're coming into town. You want to build affordable housing. You're asking for all these waivers and requests, and the first thing you say is, "Hey, we're going to throw the rules and regulations right out of the ballpark and say, because we're affordable housing, we're requesting this waiver." I get it. But we also have administrative fees and we have rules and regulations. And I think, you have to come halfway on that. We can agree to disagree, but on the waiver aspect, especially when it comes to the fees. So you're saying that, the $45,000 is not off the table based on, what type of peer review we're going to need and how much that's going to cost. I think obviously we're entitled to that, and we'll work out an agreement on that. But I'm also interested on the administrative fee, where it says $200 per unit. Okay, you think $81,000 or $80,000 is excessive. Obviously, we've done other 40Bs where we've had tens of $1,000s in there for the administrative fee. You may be able to get that back, but I don't think $4,500 is sufficient. Maybe the $80,000 based on, you're being able to go back and go to HAC is maybe excessive. Maybe it doesn't fly the sniff test, but there has to be something in the middle between that. Personally for me, because I think it just shows goodwill that you're coming into town and you want to work in the project, you want to work with the town, you want to work with the boards. I think that's fair, given it's definitely not going to render the development uneconomic. $40,000 on the administrative fee, I wouldn't see that would fly.
Mr. Chairman, can I address those comments?
Yes.
So I don't completely agree with Adam on what the test is for a fee waiver. We haven't actually asked for a 40B waiver of the fees. We've asked for a waiver under your own regs that permit a request for a waiver. So we are following the regulations, I believe, which is your regulations say a 40B project pays $86,000 before you come in the door, or you pay $1,000 and request a waiver and discuss it with the board. So I think we are following the regulations.
Okay.
We paid the $1,000, we gave you a letter, we cited to the regulations where we think it should be less than $86,000, and we're here discussing it.
Okay.
So I don't want you to give the impression that we are intending to be rude to the board or rude to the town.
I didn't say that. All I'm saying is that I think it's I always, it's being a good neighbor and having, working together as a town to get what you want, right? I just think it goes a long way with saying, hey, we don't want to pay that amount. So
Great.
That's my personal opinion.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add a couple more comments to that discussion?
You may.
Thank you. So on the on the fees, I think that there's other rules. So this whole process, you have local rules, just like you have a local zoning bylaw, and then we have some state rules around this, and we like to keep ourselves well educated on what those rules are. And we believe what the state rules require for assessing administrative fees to a comp permit project is they have to be reasonable. They have to bear a relationship to what the town's costs actually are, and they can't be more than what you charge projects, non-comprehensive permit projects. So I don't know what it costs you to get administrative support for this board. I don't know what you pay for your secretary. I don't know what you pay for your copies and things like that. You folks know. $4,500 seems like a fairly decent budget to support a handful of meetings. This process takes, can take from 4 meetings to 8 meetings, somewhere in that range. That seems like a $500 to $1,000 a meeting of administrative support. That's why I say I don't think $4,500 is completely out of the ballpark. $20,000 seems a lot for administrative support for a comprehensive permit project, unless we're planning on doing 40 meetings. And that's possible, but and I don't mind that. My client will, but I'm out most nights. I'm here or I'm somewhere else. So, but that's what I'm getting at. I think that's the test. I think the test is, what does it actually cost you? Like, what's it costing the town? Is that, is it a reasonable number? Those two are about the same test. And then do you charge non-comp permit projects less? So there's a number in there, and that's a discussion. And I think Adam is right. That isn't a decision that has to be made right up front, even though a filing fee is normally collected, and it feels weird not to collect a filing fee right up front. But that question can linger. That question can be decided by you put a condition on your decision that says you will pay this amount as a filing fee, as the balance of your filing fee, or we figure it out in between now and then. But I'm happy to have some more discussions, even offline, with your council as to whether we can come to a number that that we propose at the next hearing session that does those things, that I think meets the standard for administrative fees, which is, what does it cost you? Is it reasonable? And is it not more than what you charge for non-affordable housing projects?
It'd be appropriate.
Mr. Chair, may I make a
Yes,
comment? I know that when we have normal meetings and things like that, we don't require town council to be here. Is town council's fees separate from this application fee? Is that part of would that be part of the peer review fee, or would that be?
No, that's not part of the peer review. I believe you're on retainer to the town.
That's correct. So there's actually some case law concerning the involvement of legal counsel, specifically in Chapter 40B developments. And certainly applicants can be requested to fund counsel. I've been involved in many Chapter 40B projects on behalf of zoning boards of appeal where an applicant has voluntarily funded the board's counsel. In the absence of a volunteer of funding, the board can't charge the cost of counsel to an applicant. Just to provide some clarity, the statements being made by the applicant are somewhat consistent, although there's maybe greater clarity or specificity in your rules and regulations. Your rules and regulations have several pages on fees and on the calculation of those fees and on what those fees are meant to represent. So there is a reference to these general administration and processing fees, which is what we're talking about. The number's not 80, and I think it is important that we're working with the correct numbers. By my calculation, the number is $41,000. That would be the general administration and process fee that the applicant would be paying for the administration and processing of this application, separate from peer reviews. $41,000. That's based upon a minimum $1,000 and then $200 per unit times 200 units in the proposed development. That gets you to $41,000. The purpose of this fee portion, and I'm reading directly from your regulations, is to cover all anticipated municipal and general governmental costs of all town boards and departments as a result of the application. Costs include, but are not limited to, intergovernmental processing, reviewing, providing comments, site inspecting, revising various town maps, and the publishing of legal notices regarding the submission of the application and the associated plan or plans, and all other related documents. So that's the purpose of this administration and process fee that you charge. The number is $41,000. The applicant's proposing $4,500. And the question for your board is, do you want to waive all or any portion of that?
Question, if there's one building inspector. And if with this large project, he needs to hire somebody to be part-time because he can't handle all his regular business along with this large development, does that come out of this administration fee?
It would not. That would be generally mitigation associated with the approval of the project. Now, that's a much broader discussion, a much more complicated discussion. What happens when the development of a project in your community has such far-reaching effects that it has impacts on your town government, on your public schools? To what extent can you defer some of those costs to an applicant through conditions of approval? There are certain instances where you can, there are certain instances where you can't. But with respect to the application fee, that would not be the purpose of the application fee that the board is collecting. The purpose of the application fee is to fund processes, some I've just described, that really occur from the date of submittal of the application until the date of issuance or denial of the comprehensive permit.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the fees? Would it be appropriate to push this would it be appropriate to push this to another meeting where we can collect more on the administrative part? More information from,
So that's fair. The board, as the applicant said, and I do concur, the board is under no obligation to make this sort of a determination tonight. The application fee would typically be paid upon submittal of an application.
Correct.
The applicant does have an option under your rules and regulations to pay the minimum fee and then to seek a fee waiver, which is what's been done. I don't disagree with the applicant. There is a specific provision in your rules and regulations that talks about waiving of the fee. I still stand by what I said earlier, which is in the event that you deny the waiver of the fee, likely that would be something that would be part and parcel of some potential future appeal, and then we'd be dealing with the 40B standard. But nevertheless, you don't have to make that determination tonight. You can defer it to a later meeting.
okay,
Mr. Chair, may I ask
Yes.
another question?
please.
Is there a way for us to require the 4,500, however, still look at the full cost of the fee? So in other words, we are agreeing to review this. However, we know that as the applicant has stated, they are saying that this will be it should be at least 4,500 as a minimum. And that we can come, and we would look at some time to maybe say, as you talked about, it would be part of the conditions that they pay the balance of the fee. But the idea would be, is my feeling is that this is not what we normally do, these books. This is not what we normally do with every single department. And so therefore, the cost that we have is above normal to begin with. I would argue that we've already come close to that $4,500 based on everything that we're seeing here, as well as based on the amount of trees we killed to print up all this paper. But is there a way for us to phrase this so that they must pay the $4,500 for these hearings to continue? And then, however, we have the right still to condition the balance of the 4,100.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I think you have that ability. I mean, you have no obligation, and I want to be careful about my choice of words, you have no obligation to grant the waiver. If you don't grant the waiver, it'll be subject to the test that we've discussed, and it could be that your denial of the waiver fails altogether and that there is no application fee, or the minimum application fee that the applicant seeks is what is determined to be appropriate by some further state agency or court. If you believe that the 4,500 represents, let's say, a minimum of cost to the town, and you want to grant that limited waiver now with an understanding that the ultimate waiver would be granted when you take action on the comprehensive permit, you can do that. I think the better approach is to give some thought to the request that's been made by the applicant, if you're not prepared to take action tonight, to try to gather the information that you need through the resources you have, through staff and otherwise, as to what the approximate cost of processing this application will be. Those are not impossible numbers to gather. We can guess as to the approximate length of a process, a Chapter 40B comprehensive permit application process based upon the standards in the regulation and past precedent. And you can likely achieve a number, apply a calculation and achieve an appropriate estimate as to what the cost of processing this application would be. And I think that would be the better approach.
Okay. Then I think we should, because one thing I want to look back is I want to find out what the real fees on the last projects were.
Right.
Because I don't want to,
You have a couple of those, actually.
yeah, we have a couple to look at.
Yeah.
We can go by what they built, plus maybe inflation since that time, fee, increases in salary.
Someone came up with a $200 number, so they must have that
Well,
somewhere.
yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's not arbitrary.
No, it's not. So we will postpone the fee issue until we can gather more information on that.
Mr. Chairman, just one question while we're on that. What about the waivers in general, all the waiver requests in addition to this? Do we wait on that and just? do the
I think
tickets, or-
what we want to do, what we had talked about up front is try and make it so people, that's why I only read traffic tonight.
I gotcha.
There's a lot, I don't want to have all kinds
Okay,
conversations going on. I want people to be able to understand exactly what we're talking about
Okay.
every time, without a lot of different subjects coming up.
Thank
So tonight, if we talk about, we're going to traffic, in the traffic review that you have submitted, and then we will talk about the legal briefs that I believe you sent to Attorney Costa, and you're going to give your argument on the sewer and water, and he will respond, and we'll talk about that.
Okay, great.
Okay, so if we could address the traffic, I'll invite you to, if you have a traffic consultant.
We don't with us tonight, but I'll explain why. And you'll remember at our last hearing session, we talked about, primarily at the end of that session, was talking about water and sewer extensions to the site. We noted at the first hearing that those were critical to the project, and there was certainly some level of disagreement over whether this board was authorized to grant waivers from the water district requirements and the sewer commission requirements. And that was the primary topic for tonight. In addition, I requested to the board, could we submit traffic reports before tonight's session and at least get some initial feedback going. So we have submitted 2 traffic reports. There's one done, if I could just pull them up. So you have 2 traffic reports. The first is dated in 2020, September 16, 2020. It actually includes an analysis of a larger project and includes significant data information on the back of that report as well. The conclusion of that report is that the acceptable level of service is maintained and that safety is maintained, even with a larger project than what we're proposing here tonight. You also have an updated report, partly because we wanted to focus a report pretty much primarily on this scale project, and also because the 2020 report was done at a time where we were still under COVID limitations. So the original report uses some factors they did traffic counts during COVID, but then used some factors to escalate those to sort of eliminate COVID. We weren't completely comfortable with that, so Mr. O'Brien went and hired the traffic engineer to do updated counts post-COVID restrictions. When schools were in, a lot of businesses were back in session. That is the 2021 traffic report you have in front of you. The date on that is October 27, 2021. That compares a couple options, but importantly for our discussion is it compares the 200-unit project you have before you now, as well as a build-out of the remainder of the subdivision. That report also includes estimates on build-out in the area and utilization of those roads, I believe, through 2027, and a development horizon that you would usually expect in a traffic report. So they're not just looking at today's traffic and the proposed project. They're looking at today's traffic, the proposed project, the build-out of the balance of the single-family subdivision, and the build-out of other projects that haven't been proposed yet, but could be estimated. Those are all considered in that 2021 traffic report. And there's a conclusion and there's a lengthy discussion over the level of service effect and the safety of that roadway. The conclusion in that report is that there will be level of service acceptable, even with all those factors included, and that the safety of the roadway is maintained. They actually don't even suggest any improvements within the roadway corridor except for one. So the traffic engineer suggests one more roadway improvement, which is to trim vegetation near the site drive to improve site distance. But the traffic engineer does note that minimum site distance does exist even with the overgrown vegetation along the edge of the roadway. But they do suggest that a condition of the project could be the trimming of that vegetation both within the site and along the roadway side to improve site distance. So that's the conclusion of it. Now, I'm not looking behind me, but I'm expecting you're seeing skepticism in the folks in the back of the room. And this is the reason why we did not bring our traffic engineer tonight, because what we'd like to do is fund a peer review of the traffic, peer review that you select, to review the extensive data that's been collected by our traffic engineer on 2 different occasions, and we believe has taken a very conservative approach. We didn't bring that traffic engineer tonight because we would expect skepticism, because traffic has certainly been talked about with the folks who came out to the first meeting. It's been talked about before at this site. It's talked about in the planning board memo. And there's concern about it. I see it as either the headline issue or a headline issue in this project. And we think a real discussion can only happen with you having the assistance of a peer reviewer. So what we'd like the board to do is make a motion to seek a peer reviewer, gather a scope of work, let us take a look at it, bring our traffic engineer into that discussion, come to an agreement on that, fund that peer review, and then have a night here where we can get robust discussion about that, about our traffic report, what your peer reviewer has to say, and how we make traffic safe despite the impact of this project. And that's the way we'd propose to proceed from here. We're also happy to take, if anyone has any initial comments on traffic, and I'd love to step back and get those from the board or however the chair wants to handle it. But I would love some initial feedback on the traffic report, or you might decide, you know what, let's save that for that session where we have the peer reviewer in attendance and we can all speak intelligently about it.
Okay. I'll tell you right now, when I reviewed your traffic report, I don't think it goes near far enough. You go to 3 intersections: Howard Street, Lunenburg Road, West Townsend Road, Chase Road, West Townsend Road, Howard Street, and New West Townsend Road. And that's the sites you look at. You don't go up to Mass Ave, where it connects. You don't go to the lights where it connects to Route 13. Again, I would agree with the Leominster and Fitchburg mayors that this study is limited. I think it has to be a much wider study. I think the state MEPA has to be done. I think that all should be funded. We do need to hire a peer review for the traffic, but I was hoping that you would come in with some of a more in-depth traffic study of the area. Comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, just a quick question. So the regulatory body that the mayors of Fitchburg and Leominster were talking about, those standards meet this traffic report? I mean, what was it? They were referencing something in there.
Is it MEPA?
MEPA.
MEPA, which
So-
I believe is I can't think of.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Protection agent.
right, MEPA, the MEPA review process is a state process as opposed to a local process. There are various triggers that would require MEPA review. Those triggers range from the degree of site disturbance, to the number of parking spaces, to the traffic generated by a particular project. I can't speak, but I'm sure the applicant can, to whether or not this project triggers MIPA. I suspect that it does. That would be separate and apart from the 40B process. In other words, the applicant couldn't seek a waiver of any of those requirements or the threshold because it's state law, not local law. But it's certainly fair game for the board to inquire about whether there's a MIPA review that's been undertaken, what the status is, see copies of any material submitted to MIPA. That's fair game in terms of you informing yourselves as to the nature of the project and what other reviews are being undertaken.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that?
I would love to comment on that. I'm not going to argue with whether so MIPA gets triggered by a combination of two things. So the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, there's a national one too, but we have our own state version. But MIPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, is basically triggered for larger projects that require something from the state, a state permit, state funding, or state land, generally the three things. So you have to have a state action combined with being a project that's large enough that it goes above one of the thresholds. I'm not going to quibble over the thresholds. Let's just assume for tonight we're over one of the thresholds. What we don't have yet is the state action. I suspect eventually we will, because I think this board can give us waivers on sewer and water extensions, and those extensions will likely require DEP sewer or water extension. That would be a state action, would trigger MIPA. There's other types of state action, state wetlands permit, which we may or may not need. But that kind of state action combined with going over the threshold. So that's the long sort of explanation of what MIPA is and how it gets triggered. The short story is it's not triggered yet for this project. It probably will be. It probably will be after the comp permit is complete that those things get triggered and we go through MIPA review then. So if people are calling for MIPA review, I would say stay tuned.
Any other questions from the board on that?
The only other thing I'd say, Mr. Chairman, is that, I concur with you. I think we should get a traffic engineer or a peer reviewer who's gonna look after the town's best interest. I will say this, though. I did not see the October 27th report, but I do have the September 16th, 2020, and I did notice that it was taken in August, so I thought it was a little outdated. Obviously, you guys have updated it since then. So, but, you have 300 and something plus bedrooms coming into town over there. There's only two roads that they're gonna take between Howard. It's either New West Townsend Road or West Townsend Road. So, either of those two roads are gonna be impacted. I'd be interested to see what our peer reviewer says in addition to comments on your traffic study to see what we say.
I agree. I think right now, and I may be corrected, but I think the current traffic volume is about 534 trips per day, if I read this right. And the new volume would be 4,906. I got that from page 21 of the report.
You've been doing your reading. That's good.
I read the whole thing.
Excellent.
He doesn't have much of a life after this.
I lead a very boring life.
Yes, and that's the
It's on
exact
material.
that's the exact sort of data I think we need to drill down on. I also think we should both have our traffic folks in the room with us, our experts, to lead us through that. Some of those numbers are not only this project, like I said, but the subdivision project and estimates on future projects. So it's good to understand where those numbers are at. But having that kind of robust discussion on traffic and what exactly traffic is going to look like, the best that the good experts can estimate right now, with this project in place, that's a discussion that should be part of this process, and we're happy to participate in it. And I'd urge the board, get a peer reviewer on board, we'll pay for him, and we'll have that discussion.
Okay. And again, I'm gonna just reiterate some of the planning boards. I too have driven up and down the road a few times now. I do find that road to be very narrow in some places, 20 feet, as in your report, with trees that are abut the surface of the road. A lot of the curves, a lot of them are going up hills and around corners. I do You know, so that's why I do agree that we need to get the peer review and get this settled.
Yes.
And I did read where you had to clear the vegetation mainly from your exit on both ways, which would, of course, be required. But with that, any other questions on traffic?
So does that mean that that they need to put money into, for us to fund?
Yeah, they need to put money into
So we
peer
can't
review.
We can't continue until they have funds in there for us
They-
to even
I believe
consider hiring
that
somebody.
they need to put money into the instead of the town part, but the technical.
Correct.
Am I correct?
You are, Mr. Chairman. So the way that this process typically works, and I haven't represented your board with other 40B projects, so I don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you've got a process that works, I'm happy to defer. Different boards have done it different ways. But your regulations do, to some extent, define the process, and they simply mimic Chapter 44, Section 53G, and what that statute calls for. It requires you to identify the consultant you intend to use as a peer review consultant. You provide the applicant with notice as to who you're using. It's routine, sort of common courtesy to provide a copy of the the consultant's scope of services to the applicant. The applicant has an opportunity to appeal that determination to the select board. They can only appeal it really on two grounds: conflict of interest or lack of qualification. In nearly 2 decades of practice, I've seen that happen once. So it's not something that happens frequently. Typically, the applicant will agree to the scope. The scope will have a number at the end. That's the sum that you need for the peer review to be completed. You request a check in that amount, or a check that will cover that amount together with however many other peer reviews you might be undertaking at the same time to fund minimally that first round. And then, of course, sometimes in addition, there'll be line items within that scope that say, scope of services is $4,500, but for every meeting that I attend as a consultant, it's going to be another $1,000. So you'll need to estimate if you want that traffic consultant at the next meeting or 2 additional meetings. You'll have to add that to the scope and add that to the sum that you're requesting from the applicant. Many boards choose to do that through staff between meetings, because otherwise, if you don't decide on a consultant tonight and you don't have a name before you tonight, then you've got to wait till your next meeting when you have names to choose a consultant. And then if the applicant says, well, I'm not sure, I want to review that consultant with my client and see if I'm going to challenge, then you've got to wait till the next meeting until you get an answer to whether or not there will be a challenge. So most boards will defer that task to their administrative staff, that please choose a consultant, select a consultant that's acceptable, provide notice to the applicant, obtain funds from the applicant, and get the peer review underway. And some will authorize the chair to bless the choice of consultant.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question?
You may.
I agree completely with the assessment that the scope of the traffic that was, study that was done was minimal and does not really show the true impact that this project will have on the town of Lunenburg. Can we request that to increase the scope of the traffic study on additional roads in the town? So I'll look at it as, why am I blanking on the names of the roads? But New West Townsend Road connects to the center of town through,
Northfield.
Northfield.
Right.
So this is gonna have a huge impact on Northfield Road,
That's-
which we know is a small road to begin with, as we look at it. So I would like to see. Highland Street, so there's a bunch of roads that this, depending on which road that they're gonna be taking, coming out of. to
Right.
come out.
That's why I said it's
Yeah.
limited. We need to expand it.
Right, but could we request that before we have a peer review?
I think you just put in the scope of work, right? That it's gonna take a look at this.
I think we
traffic
want to
study.
talk to our peer traffic consultant
Okay,
and get all of the feedback. Like I say, I do think yours is limited, very limited. I would expect it to at least do the streets that people are going to take and include Mass Ave and Route 13 where it connects to Mass Ave in that area. Because that traffic, I would say 80% of that traffic is going, well, not maybe 80, but a large volume of traffic is going to be heading to Route 2. And that's very limited ways to get there from Howard Street.
Well, I've been keeping a running list of the street names that have been mentioned. I think the suggestion to have the peer reviewer comment on that is a good one, because what I don't want to do is have our peer reviewer go back out in the field, maybe do more counts or do whatever they need to do, and then find out your peer reviewer says, oh, and you should have also had this other street
Right,
on the
that's what
list
I'm
too.
saying, we want-
So I think the suggestion over here and here is a good one, that, and maybe the geography extent of this report needs to be looked at, but let's get your peer reviewer's input on that. Let the peer reviewer tell us a little bit about how far that scope should be. And then, with that, usually those two peer reviewers talk to each other a little bit too. And your peer reviewer convinces our project engineer to make some changes. That's often how the process works.
Right. And two, I just want to mention too that, like I say, and it was mentioned earlier, Howard Street has no sidewalks. I want input on that because there's going to be a lot of pedestrians. There's no public transportation from that area. They're either going to go on a car, a bike. There's no lighting on that road. So if somebody gets home from work at, in the winter at 5 o'clock and they take their dog out for a walk, it's dark, that road's narrow. So all of these things I want, is part of this. Okay, any other questions on this, which we will postpone until we will get a traffic consultant?
Yeah, I think that I don't know if you need a motion, but, work with Lisa on a traffic consultant, and in between meetings, figure that out so that we're not wasting time and that we can
Correct.
address it.
I'll need a motion.
Yeah. I'll make a motion that we table the traffic until we can have a consult with a consultant and get some estimate on charges.
And defer the choice to our secretary and building inspector,
I'm sorry?
and defer the selection of who the peer review is?
Well, I mean, I think
No,
we
I
can
think
take their suggestions, but we
we'll-
have to make that decision.
We'll look at that, we'll discuss that.
And that, and also that the discussion can't continue until, agreed upon funds are deposited into the account.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 And so, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, what you've done is you've authorized the process of identifying potential consultants and obtaining scopes of services, but you haven't authorized any work to get underway. And that's fine. What that means is that coming back to you, hopefully in advance of and at your next meeting, will be these scopes of services with potential consultants, and you will take that vote. What that also means is that not only will you not have a peer review consultant's report for your next meeting, you may not even have it for the subsequent meeting, because peer review consultants can take as many as 6 to 8 weeks to complete a peer review. So I just remind you of this because what I might suggest you also consider tonight is the extent of other peer reviews needed. You've already heard reference by the applicant to things like general civil engineering of the site, because you do have time limits for this process to play out, and you want to be sure that you're making progress meeting after meeting. If we wait, 2 more meetings before we've got a consultant on for civil, it's going to be 3 or 4 more meetings before you actually have feedback from that consultant. Then you may need to go 1 or 2 rounds with the applicant's consultant, the applicant's representatives. All of that takes time, and eventually we're going to find ourselves up against the clock.
Okay, so can I amend then?
Yeah,
So that we,
can amend it.
New motion.
new
Need
motion.
a motion to it.
Oh. So that we reach out to our possible peer review folks for, at this point, traffic, civil, fire, trying to think what else we would have right at the moment, but I know the rest of them come up. As we
There's,
keep going. I'm trying to remember the last 40B that we went through, how many we had. I thought there was
No,
like
I-
6 of them in total.
What I'd like to do, can we meet in a executive session to discuss peer reviews?
You cannot.
We cannot. Okay, yeah, so we have to to come up with the list.
But we don't have to have all of
Civil
them, right?
engineer,
Right,
definitely need,
so
environmental.
so you need to come up with a list so you can give some direction to your staff as to who, from whom to get quotes, scopes of services and whatnot. You could choose to meet, and I've had boards do this. Let's say, based upon the information you gathered tonight, you're not prepared for another substantive meeting on this 40B, let's say for another 4 weeks, maybe even 5 or 6 weeks. You
Right.
can schedule a meeting for 2 weeks out. It would be a continuation of the public hearing, but you can advise the public and the applicant, you're going to meet for, 30 minutes to discuss peer reviews and select peer review consultants, and there's going to be nothing else substantively discussed. It would still be a public meeting. It would still be open to the public as a session of the public hearing, but you could do that if you so choose.
Can we add to the list of peer review that we want to request?
At any time, you can determine that you need additional peer reviews. I think getting started with the couple we've heard referenced or 3 we've heard referenced is sufficient. You could decide 2 months from now, based upon information you receive from those consultants or from the applicant, that there's some other component of the project that requires peer review, and if the applicant agrees, then that can occur at that time.
Right. So I think that's a good idea, that we.
Correct, yeah.
We have a hearing, next scheduled hearing, which I believe we have a case coming up in 2 weeks.
Okay,
So we'll schedule it the same night.
yeah.
We'll
Yes.
do the first case, and then we'll do peer review in public. And we'll decide at that time, because I had a list too, and I can't find it at the moment.
Yeah, I think we just have to be mindful of the time period that we have. so
Correct.
Not,
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah. We need to have them on board.
yeah.
Okay. So
Open it up for
We need-
public discussion.
so we will announce, we'll have a hearing, we'll go to a date certain in time, but we'll do that at the end. Okay, with that, we can go into the legal, which is also scheduled for tonight. Appropriate to ask for public now on the traffic.
It's up to you. You can do that.
Yeah. Actually, before I do that, because we're still on traffic, usually I wait to the end for public comment, but I'm going to do public comment right now for anybody that wants to speak specifically to the traffic, or anything else you want to say, but I'm going to open the public up for anybody that would like to speak right now. Please. I think this will help because it'll bring out more of your concerns.
Great, thank you. My name is Chris Thibodeau, 259 Howard Street. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council. Of course, over the past few months, I've become invested in the possible development of Pondview Estates, particularly the 200 units of apartment housing that could be installed in our country road. I am concerned about the traffic on Howard Street, the deceitfulness of the builder in his quest to develop the land by all means necessary, regardless of what it means to be a good neighbor to our community. But in my mind, I am most concerned about our school system. I am a teacher in a nearby district in Metro West. The district in which I work has been dubbed a high-performing school district for a few different reasons. Percentage of students who enter college after graduating high school, MCAS, standardized test scores, but most importantly to me as an educator and someone who has a fairly good understanding of public education, teacher-to-student ratio. It is statistically proven that school districts with the lowest student-to-teacher ratios in turn have high learning outcomes regardless of the makeup of factors such as socioeconomic status, race, and students with disabilities. The good news is that the factors that make up our public schools are transparent and available to the public on the Department of Education website. Here are some observations I found about Lunenburg, which left me with a few very important ponderings and questions. The current teacher-to-student ratio in Lunenburg is 14.3 students to 1 teacher. When comparing that ratio to our neighbors, our numbers are higher. Fitchburg and Leominster, for instance, are both in the 13 students to 1 teacher range. The town where I work has 12 students to 1 teacher, and the regional high school that my students attend is 8 students to 1 teacher. Clearly, as Lunenburg stands, there is some work to be done in regards to our student and teacher ratio. I want us to assume that with Mr. O'Brien's development, there will be approximately 400 additional students enrolled in our school district between the single-family homes and the 40B apartment complex. Let's dive into how this will impact our current numbers. If staffing does not change, our enrollment will climb from 1,597 students to 1,997 students. This will change our teacher-to-student ratio from 14.3, which remember is already higher than our neighboring communities, to 17.9 students to one teacher. I scoured the DESE website to find a district with an almost 18-to-1 ratio and could not find one. This includes Boston Public, Worcester Public, and Lowell Public. Let's assume that Lunenburg is reactive and strives to maintain our 14-to-1 ratio after Pondview Estates is developed. This would require us to hire 29 additional teachers at an average salary of about $83,000 a year. This would be an overwhelming total of $2,408,566 per year and would be an almost 10% total school budget increase. Having worked in a public school for almost 10 years, I know that this would not be a feasible staffing increase. I know that our students are more than MCAS scores, but nonetheless, they have become a benchmark for district performance and success and college readiness. I worry about how Pondview Estates will impact our student growth, which currently only partially meets the state's MCAS expectations in 2 out of 6 categories and marginally meets the state's MCAS expectations in 4 out of 6 categories. I worry that our district will never grow to exceed state expectations with the addition of this development and the impact it will have on learning every single day for every single student. My questions are how the town plans to address the needs of our students and teachers if the development of Pondview Estates continues forward. What is the plan to balance the budget to ensure that our student growth continues on the upward trajectory it is on? What is the plan to ensure that our students will not only meet but exceed the state MCAS expectations? What is your plan to retain our wonderful teachers in our district that are so important to the makeup of our small town culture, even when their classrooms are full with 30+ students in any given section if they're not already? Lunenburg needs to be proactive by not allowing Pondview Estates to be built, and which would ensure the health of our school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paula Bertram, 312 Townsend Harbor Road, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this application tonight. I want to address 2 subjects, if I may. The first is traffic, and then the second is an additional peer review that I think is urgently needed. I'm extremely concerned about the negative traffic impacts this project is going to have on Route 13. And frankly, I'm astounded to hear that the only recommendation is some tree trimming. On April 14th, I was involved in a very serious traffic accident on Route 13, in which I was at a complete stop waiting to turn onto West Townsend Road. And I was rear-ended by a vehicle going over 50 miles an hour. I suffered herniated discs and other personal injuries, which I'm still dealing with. Since April 14th, I have personally observed 2 additional accidents in the same area. This project, I work at 520 Chase Road, which is the DPW highway building, and it's constant, either small, minor accidents or major accidents. This project will greatly exacerbate the dangerousness of the intersection of Route 13 and West Townsend Road and greatly impact the volume of traffic within the entire community. So I agree with having a traffic study, and I urge you to really look at the accident ratio in this area. I also want to talk about the application as both a representative of Hickory Hills Landowners, Inc. and a citizen of Lunenburg. And the thing I want to talk about is the environmental impacts of this project. As stated in the letter that Hickory Hills Landowners submitted to Mass Housing, our community is extremely concerned about the negative impacts to delicate ecosystems in the area. This property is the location of the headwaters of Mulpus Brook. This is the main feed to Hickory Hills Lake. Water depths in the area of the brook are extremely shallow, generally about 4 feet, due to the amount of accumulated sediment that washes in from the brook during storm events. Stormwater testing that we've done in the cove indicates where the brook enters the lake, the levels of phosphorus and nitrates are significantly higher than what is desirable, and additionally there's very high levels of E. coli. The outflow from Hickory Hills is to the Cowdrey Conservation Area, which is a priority habitat for rare species. The decline of water quality to this area may result in catastrophic impacts to wildlife. According to the Nashua River Watershed Association, the land upstream of the Mulpus, which is this area, should be protected to protect natural wildlife corridors and prevent harmful impacts on the ecosystem and habitat integrity. Hickory Hills Lake is a valuable environmental resource to the town and home to over 530 residences. This development may irreversibly impact the aquatic health of Hickory Hills and the Mulpus, resulting in decreased valuations on homes in the Hickory Hills area, which will then trickle down to all taxpayers of Lunenburg. According to the Mass Housing website, the 40B planning law promotes responsible housing growth. Frankly, this project is far from a responsible housing project. Chapter 40B is supposed to balance the regional need for affordable housing development with local public health, public safety, design, and environmental welfare. This project will negatively impact numerous facets of Lunenburg's infrastructure, including public safety, sewer, water, schools, and the environment. I would urge this board to consider the impacts to Mulpus Brook, Hickory Hills Lake, and the entire town of Lunenburg when evaluating this application, and request that a complete stormwater study be done on this project and a peer review be done by an environmental consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to speak? Please.
My name is John Alotalo, Howard Street, Lunenburg, 244. 75 years resident of Howard Street. When I was young, there was only 13 houses on the road. Every family only had one car. And as the years progress, everybody, they got their cars they needed to get their transportation to work or like that. And all the kids took the school bus. But nowadays, I don't see too many kids on the buses anymore. I don't know if there's a fee for the buses these days, or I don't know what the situation is. Can someone tell me?
I don't know.
It's free to take the bus.
Well, as you drive by the schools in town, you can see lines of cars in the school parking lots and along the road to pick up their kids, because the kids don't take the bus. If there's going to be 200 cars in the project, there's going to be 200 cars going back and forth to the school every day, 2 trips, and the people going to work will be traveling down Howard Street, West Townsend Road, Chase Road, the West Townsend Road extension. They'll take Lancaster Ave or Highland Street to get to Route 2 or to get to Air. And the other people take 13 and Electric Avenue to get to Route 2. And if anybody traveled on Route 13 in Leominster, they changed the road drastically with new lights. And if you get stuck in that traffic, I don't know, for people familiar with Day Street in Leominster, the traffic is backed up to Day Street right down to Route 2 every day, both nighttime and in the morning. So this project is going to just make a disaster of the traffic in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? This gentleman first, then I'll take you second.
We'll get to you, don't worry.
Members of the board, Mr. Chairman, Andy Klein, 30 Baker Street, Unit 2, and at the risk of being booed, I'm going to actually speak in support of this project. I'm going to say that I've been in Lunenburg since around this time, 2016, but before, I was homeless. I wasn't homeless because of the fact that I didn't have references from my last landlord who made changes to the property, necessitating me leave. I wasn't homeless because I couldn't afford it. I had first, last, and security for a significantly more expensive apartment than I eventually found. I was homeless because of the fact that there were, and I looked for 45 days, I had about 6 weeks, not a single apartment available in North Central. The apartment that I almost ended up in before the landlord changed his mind and decided to renovate would have been all the way out in Phillipston. I was living in Westminster at the time. We have a massive crisis right now in this country, in this state, in this region. To quote somebody from, and I forget the gentleman's name, I just looked at it on Facebook. He has 4 kids who grew up here in Lunenburg. They can't move home because there's no roof to put over their head. It's almost incensing to me to go and hear members of my community not find some Yankee ingenuity to find a way to safely, adequately, to within the regulations, both state and local, make this work. Those 200 apartments to me represent 200 opportunities I might have had to have had a roof over my head when the only roof over my head was my car, or sleeping on someone's floor, or sleeping on a couch trying not to overstay a welcome. I'm a middle-class person. I had the money. There was no roof for me to go and put over my head. So I beg you to think about the fact that homelessness is climbing. We are on the verge of a great recession that is going to go and necessitate even more housing. This project and projects like it, we need it. And whether it comes here or a surrounding community, we're going to be impacted by it. Let's collect the tax dollars. Let's do it responsibly with the due process, with the peer review that you've mentioned, something that fully support. But let's find a way to make this work. I'm the face of homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. You were next.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Board. My name is Adam DeCino. I live at 537 Howard Street in Lunenburg. I'm at the very tail end of Howard Street, right before you get down to the West Townsend Road turn, which is a very sharp turn. I've only been in the town for about 3 years. I've lived in Groton and Shirley beforehand, so I do love this community very well, and I love the surrounding area. What I've noticed is Howard Street is very different. The first time I was driving up Howard Street, I was coming down, going just about to go past the farm, and surprisingly, there was an oxen right in the middle of the road. Not something you would usually see in Groton or Shirley, but it kind of clued me into how unique the town and how unique the community is. Everyone on the town is very pleasant. As I drive back and forth, I see a lot of people walking their dogs, which certainly lends to the visibility. But what I've noticed is a lot more heavy construction equipment moving up and down Howard Street, specifically going to West Townsend Road to go to Fitchburg. The vast majority of that, what I've understood, is from Waze, directing people to go down Howard Street because it's faster and it seems to avoid a lot of traffic. My concern is not only coming down, but going up the other way. In summertime, I have all my windows open, and I hear a lot of cars easily doing 40, 50 miles an hour going up the street because it's fun, specifically motorcycles. And my concern is once you get to the top of the hill and it's just about to turn, that's where all the traffic is supposed to come out from this development. And my concern is somebody's going to get severely hurt in that area. The road is not wide enough to support the truck and a car as it is. In the wintertime, as you get towards the other side of the street, it's so narrow that 2 trucks, even 2 regular passenger cars can't actually drive side by side with the ice in the roads. One person has to stop so that person can go around. I don't see adding 200 more cars doing anything but creating more chaos and potentially more accidents in the town. So that would be my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anybody?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
Hello, my name is Patty Orban. I also live at 537 Howard Street. We are the last house at the bottom of the hill right before it turns and hits a stop sign. I work from home, something I've done for 10 years. I'm new to the neighborhood, but I'm not new to watching traffic and that kind of thing. I can't tell you how many times during the workday, after work, that I have seen people speeding up and down this road. You can hear them shifting gears as they try to get up to 4th or 5th gear as they go up that hill. We are the biggest straightaway on that side of the hill. People have come down the hill doing a proper, reasonable, safe speed, only to have someone come up behind them, someone did it to me, and blow around them and hit the gas as they go by my house because they can't be bothered. I just don't, I wholeheartedly understand that we have a housing problem. I would love to see the town add more. But this isn't it. To add 5 times the amount of houses and traffic? How can anybody even be considering that as a good idea? It's a narrow road. It's got farms. Turning onto West Townsend Road from Chase, oh my God, you better have life insurance. It is terrifying sometimes. Driving Howard Street at night, you better use your high beams because there's nothing else. God help you if there's a deer or a bear or somebody out walking their dog. There's no space for this. Personally, I'd love to see the property return to the wild, but I know that's not going to happen. Worst case scenario, I'm okay with houses going in. Reasonable houses that fit the character of the neighborhood. Ones on good plots of land, not 200 new ones all of a sudden. 200 more cars? Did you say 4,000 more? 4,000 total? That's insane. Somebody's gonna die. It's not safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak?
I'm Donna Jacobson. I have a farm on the road. There may be a housing shortage. There's going to be a food shortage too. Arrow's farm had a big chicken farm, and all the laws that they're having with the chickens and having to be, you can't cage them, and it's pretty hard when trying to raise chickens, and they can fly over houses, fly over fences, and the cars go by so fast they can't even slow down and not hit my chickens crossing the street. And there's been so many accidents on my street. A man died at the bottom, young 16-year-old died at the bottom of the hill. Just look at the accidents on Howard Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Dennis Rinke, 326 Howard Street, Lunenburg. I'd like to offer you my warm fraternal greetings as a fellow resident of the town of Lunenburg. Greetings to all the zoning board members. Now, I spoke of the impacts of the Bayview Commons project at our last meeting. There is an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. It is an adage meaning that complex and sometimes multiple ideas can be conveyed by a single image. I have here several pictures which I will, with your permission, present to the board to illustrate the idea of the impact of this project in a visual sense. Now, environmental regulations, from stormwater requirements to responsibilities for hazardous waste, have long been an important consideration for real estate developers. Now, the state and federal governments require developers to take steps to ensure their construction activity doesn't have a negative impact on streams and watersheds. Developers must have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, and they must take care to supply safe water to future residents as well as people living in the vicinity of the project at the present time. As always, it is important that developers remain on top of such environmental regulations as the Clean Water Act and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and how they pertain to their current and future projects. As I have stated in my earlier presentation, the Bayview Commons project, as it stands now, in many ways reflects the same environmental impact and devastation as that of a strip mining project. This developer is not a strip miner, but he is a real estate developer, and as such, bears a responsibility to the town of Lunenburg. The minerals from the distressed land potentially trickle into the groundwater and contaminate waterways with substances that are perilous to our health. A project such as this can potentially uncover rocks that contain minerals that are basically harmless in and of themselves, but when these minerals come in contact with air and water, the results can be devastating. When it rains, the watery acid makes its way into rivers and streams and can also leak into underground sources of water. Now, the issue of silt and other contaminants has already been brought to the attention of the board by other residents of the town that have witnessed at firsthand. These toxins have already contaminated Mulfish Brook, and it is just a matter of time before these contaminants will show up in our drinking water if they haven't already. Now, when will these developers address these issues? When are they going to follow development techniques, materials, and designs meant to minimize the project's impact on the environment? And when are they going to start following the environmental regulations which are in place and mandated, not only on a local, but on a state and federal level as well? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Seeing none, I will cut off public discussion on the traffic. Patrick, is anybody on?
I see two in addition to myself and public access host. No questions. I would just say if anybody wants to speak up, to unmute yourself and send us a signal, which I do not see anyone
Okay,
unmuting
thank you.
themselves.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will now move on to the legal arguments on water and sewer.
Would you like me to jump right in, Mr. Chairman?
Jump right in.
All right. Thank you. So at the first hearing session with the board, we concluded that by pointing to today as a focus on the board's authority to allow waivers to allow water and sewer utilities to be extended to the project site. I'll just remind the board that this project relies on extension of public water and public sewer to serve the project. We do not believe it is possible without extension of public water or public sewer. There was some concern raised at the first hearing as to whether this board had authority under 40B to, in essence, extend those districts, extend the water district or extend the sewer commission's district area to the site to allow sewer lines and water lines to be extended to the project. We believed it did. The board asked us to put that in writing within 2 weeks of the hearing session, and we did that. So I submitted a letter, it's dated September 29th of this year, to the board explaining how I believe very strongly that the board has authority, as well as the Housing Appeals Committee has the authority to allow extensions of water and sewer to the project site. I cite 3 areas of law on that, or 3 elements of law. One, and I quoted it at the last hearing session, is that the 40B regulations are very specific about addressing the concerns raised at the earlier session, which is the water district is created by special act of the legislature. The sewer commission requires votes of town meeting to extend areas that can be served by sewer. But the state regulations on comp permit are very specific to include those things within the authority of the board. It defines a local board, which this board can act for any local board through the comprehensive permit. It includes water, sewer, other commissions or districts. It includes boards created by special acts of the legislature or by other legislative action. So I quoted that section at length at the first hearing. I won't read it all again. It's in my letter. But the state regulations clearly say that water districts, sewer districts, whether they're created by special act of the legislature or not, whether they require town meeting vote or not, I believe the regulations say explicitly this board, the Housing Appeals Committee, whoever is acting under 40B authority, has the authority of those boards and those bodies to allow for the extension of the utilities to a comprehensive project site. Then I cite two cases. They're both Supreme Judicial Court cases. So Massachusetts Supreme Court, I believe, weighed in exactly on this topic in the case involving the Maynard Board of Appeals. So it was a project in Maynard. That project required a 2,000-foot extension of the sewer line to serve the comprehensive permit site. The Board of Appeals rejected that, saying in Maynard, town meeting has to approve that sort of extension to a sewer main. Nobody in town likes this project. You're not going to get your vote. We're not granting you a waiver. We deny the project because we will not extend the sewer main to it. That was appealed. It was reversed by the Housing Appeals Committee. It was appealed by the town. It was the developer side was taken by the trial court. It was then plucked up direct from the trial court by the Mass Supreme Court. And the Mass Supreme Court, in a fairly short opinion, said very clearly that the fact that the sewer extension required town meeting approval could be dispensed with. He used the word dispensed with by the Housing Appeals Committee, or by extension, the zoning board, to allow the extension of a sewer line to a comprehensive permit project. I don't believe it could be any more on point than the situation we're looking at today. I understand Attorney Costa does not 100% agree with me. I think it's mostly around because that case does not go into great detail of the surrounding facts, but I don't think the surrounding facts are all that important to us. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts has weighed in very clearly that where you have a sewer line that requires approval of town meeting in usual circumstances to allow the extension to a comprehensive permit site, the board and the Housing Appeals Committee has the authority to dispense with that requirement, that town meeting vote to allow that. I think that's equally applicable to the sewer line in this case and to the water district as well. The issue I believe Attorney Costa takes with that is, well, we don't know in that case as to whether the town meeting vote was something that was triggered by a special act of the legislature or was contained within some special district. So I provided a second case. It is the Dennis case. It's a affordable housing comprehensive permit project on the Cape in Dennis. The Cape had an interesting special act of the legislature where they created a regional historic district. So there was an act of the legislature that said this area of the Cape, any towns within that area can adopt this state legislative act and have a special historic district in your state to protect historic elements of Cape Cod's appearance. In that case, there was a comprehensive permit project proposed within that historic district, which was authorized by state act. It had a local board that implemented it. It's equivalent to your water district and the special act. In fact, it's much more state-like than your local water district special act, because your local water district special act, of course, isn't contained only within the town. It's made up only of voters. With the district voters are only folks within the town. In that case, the Supreme Judicial Court again reviewed that and said very clearly, in essence, if it's doing local things and acting like a local authority, then it is a local board that is controlled by comprehensive permit under 40B and is something that the zoning board or the Housing Appeals Committee has the authority to act on behalf of or dispense with. Either just waive the requirement for getting a district vote to expand the water line, or waive the requirement for town meeting to expand the sewer district. And that was in a special legislative district, much broader than what we're dealing with here in the water district. It covered, I believe, 7 different towns. And the Supreme Court was very clear in that case that the board had authority to waive those requirements, did not require a separate vote or act of the Historic Commission in that case. I believe that case is also directly on point, not dealing with utilities, but dealing with a district commission created by a state legislative act. The cases that have been cited by Attorney Costa, who I well respect, and we've had many 40Bs together over the years, the cases that he cites, the Groton case in particular, is a case where the court ruled in the town's favor and said that a town meeting can't be usurped by the comprehensive permit authority, the zoning board or the Housing Appeals Committee, but in one particular instance. So it didn't say that that a zoning board doesn't have control over town meeting votes. It says a zoning board does not have control over town meeting votes that transfer land. So that was a case where the developer said, I need an easement to serve my comprehensive permit. And the easement that I want runs over town land. And zoning board, I want you to give me an easement on behalf of the town, to convey land to me or rights in land. And the court in that case says that was a bridge too far. We have a general law that has a very specific process for how towns can give away, convey, transfer land, and the 40B process doesn't override that. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. It's an important case. It put a marker in as to the bounds of a zoning board's authority in a comprehensive permit situation, but is not applicable here, does not stop this board from exercising authority over extension of water and sewer to the project site. That's a lot of information in a very short time. I believe the Housing Appeals Committee has also addressed this issue head on. I don't actually cite it in my letter because I think the Supreme Court cases in Massachusetts are more convincing. But the HAC has addressed this issue head on with similar districts and come to the same conclusion, that if those entities are doing what are typical local functions, supplying water and supplying sewer, I don't think there's a much more typical local function of local government than those two things, then those are local boards and they're subject to the 40B process. So that's our pitch on it. I think it's accurate. I think it is the law of the land, and I hope we follow that in this case. Without the board taking on the authority to consider waivers for water, to allow water and sewer extensions to the project, that's a critical element of this project. It's an issue that we really should get addressed up front. I'm glad the board asked for that issue to be considered tonight because I think it is a threshold issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, and I did get Adam's letter. I'll throw him under the bus a little bit at 5:30 today. I read it on my phone, so I think I do understand it. I do have one more thing. It really is a rebuttal to the letter, but he does raise at the end of the letter a question about whether this board has the authority to waive the intermunicipal agreements with either Leominster or Fitchburg or both. I would like to know what the basis is for that. Why do we think we need changes to the intermunicipal agreements?
Mr. Chairman, can I just comment before Attorney Costa does?
Yeah.
In the Maynard case, where and I understand the cases that you were talking about. In the Maynard case, though, the sewer connection was 2,000 feet away. I think we're proposing, or you're proposing, the applicant's proposing 3 miles. That's 16,000 feet. I mean, there's a huge difference between 2,000 feet to connect to the sewer or run it 3 miles down the road to connect to the sewer. That's a huge difference. So in that case, would the court have granted that in a 40B? The difference between if they had to go 3 miles versus 2,000 feet. To me, that's I did read the case, but that's a substantial difference between 2,000 feet and 16,000 feet. It's just, it's mind-boggling. I just wanted to put that out there. And then the other one was, I think most of the case law that I read, according to the 40Bs with respect to this, is that, the power for us as the board in acting as the de facto other boards that would normally come before it, I'm not certain that we have the authority, to do that. I mean, I think that they've referenced, conditions and requirements, local boards, meaning us as the de facto board, conditions and requirements with respect to height, site plan, size, or shape of building materials, not necessarily acting as the water district or the sewer commission. But I mean, obviously, we have town council here to give us some advice, but what I read on those decisions is what I interpreted. I think there's a big difference between 2,000 feet and 16,000 feet, and I think there's a big difference between, asking us to step in as the sewer commission to create a new sewer district and a new water district in that part of town where clearly the applicant has gone to the Water Commission to seek their vote, got denied in 2021 if I recollect. So there's just there's obviously we'll hear, but I think there's a couple issues, and I think obviously sewer and water are the biggest issues. Let me ask you this. Has the applicant looked at doing an alternative and just, on-site septic like you had with your, the 100 and something subdivision that was approved back in 2019 for the single-family homes? Because that was all going to be on, I think, well water and septic, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But you've looked at the financials to say that this project would not go forth without public sewer and public water?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and Mass Housing has looked at those same financials as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, actually, can I ask a question before we, and I apologize, but
While he's there, go
I'm
ahead.
confused slightly because as to what the ask is of us and the ask period. Is the ask for the board to create a new water and sewer district that would comprise of just this property? Or is it the ask to bring water and sewer just to the apartments and that's it? And that's what I'm trying to understand, because I'm trying to, to me, that's two different things that even if I'm gonna look at the Water and Sewer Commission, that the ask of. If the ask is for us to create a new district, then I have trouble, type of thing, because I do not feel like we're in the authority that this board is going to do the vote of vote of the people of this town without a town meeting vote. That goes against everything that Lunenburg has stood for 100 and 200 years almost. If it's just to make it so that that this project could have water and sewer, that's what I'm trying to, that's what I'd like to understand from it. And I don't know if I truly understand it, what's being
I
asked.
think that right now that the area is not in either one of the districts.
I understand it's not in the
sewer,
district,
it's
but are
not
they
in water.
asking for us to create a new district there? Or are they asking for us to allow water and sewer to this one single project?
Well, I believe people would be able to hook up as it goes down, but there are fees, there are other things involved.
I understand, but I haven't heard yet from the applicant of whether they plan on being able to supply a sufficient line that others would be, and allowing the district to be expanded. All I'm hearing is that they're asking for water and sewer for 200 units. That's it. Now, if 200 units is one size water and sewer.
Right.
If I'm looking at 3 miles of homes and properties and 100 other properties to be able to hook up to that, that's a different type of water and sewer requirement. And it requires this town to now go and see if we can appropriate more capacity from our neighboring towns and what the impact is.
We would definitely they would have to negotiate with Leominster, I know. Fitchburg, I believe, if I read it right, is not an option.
So they would have to go all the way to the Leominster line?
Yes, they would have to go to Leominster. I'm going to let the Attorney Costa speak to this so
Okay.
we have his
Perfect.
opinion
Yeah.
on the table as well, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to try and take a step back here. The bad news for the audience is I'm going to speak just as long as Attorney Bornstein did, but I'm going to try and take a step back and maybe clarify all of this for those who haven't been involved in the conversation since it started, which is back about just about a year ago, when we received notice from Mass Housing, the project subsidy, that this project was on its doorstep, and the town was asked to provide comment. I was asked to provide legal advice to the town and then an opinion to Mass Housing concerning water and sewer specifically. So I authored a letter dated September 2nd of 2021. It's the letter that I referenced during the last session of the hearing. You have copies, members, in your packets. That's what resulted in your request that the applicant, through counsel, present a legal argument tonight. He did that. I learned from your chairman tonight that you may not even have the letter that he authored about 2 weeks ago. I did send a copy along when I received it to Lisa, who I understand has been out for a period of time, so there may have been a disconnect there. But Attorney Bornstein did write a letter. I think it was 3 or 4 pages. He's captured most of it in his presentation tonight. We'll be sure that you get copies of it after tonight's meeting. I also drafted a brief response, about a page-and-a-half response to that letter. As Attorney Bornstein said, I handed it to him as I walked in the door, and I emailed it to him on my drive tonight. You don't even have it yet, so I'm going to cover the substance of that briefly tonight. But to get back to sort of where this all started, Attorney Bornstein and I agree on certain components of what the case law says. In fact, case law says what it says, right? I don't envy you as board members because you're not typically in the business of having to act as de facto judges, interpret legal arguments, and make determinations in cases of this sort. But this is one of the difficult attributes of Chapter 40B. And what's unique about Chapter 40B, although there are aspects of it that are mimicked in 40A with your special permits and your variances, is that you have the enabling statute. Chapter 40B itself consists of all of 4 sections. You have the Chapter 40B regulations, and then all of the gaps in the statute and the regulations is filled in through case law, through 50 years of Housing Appeals Committee case law, through cases that have then proceeded to the appeals court, to the Supreme Judicial Court. You've heard a number of cases referenced tonight, and you're expected to have enough familiarity with what all those cases tell you you can't or can and can't do to be able to make determinations in cases like this. So you have the applicant presenting an argument, you've got the benefit of legal counsel to assist you with this, and as I said, I'm going to try and make it as simple as I can. So let's start with where Attorney Bornstein and I agree. The regulations say what they say. They define local board, and they define local board very broadly, and I've said so in my letter here. They define local board to include effectively any board, commission, committee, district that performs functions that are usually performed by locally created boards. That's a quote directly from the statute and the definition of local board. So I concur with Attorney Bornstein that there are many circumstances, many instances, where boards and commissions and committees in districts, whether it be a conservation commission, or it be a board of health, or it be in some instances a water or a sewer district, though the authority, the jurisdiction of those local boards are vested in you as the Zoning Board of Appeals, for better or for worse, to issue local permits. You don't get control over state permits. An applicant still has to go to the Conservation Commission for its Wetland Protection Act permit, still has to go to the Board of Health if it's seeking permission under Title V for its development and get approvals under Title V. Those are state laws, but all local permits and approvals are vested in you. So we agree with respect to the definition of local board. We also agree that you have the authority to act on behalf of all of those local boards, as I just said. What the challenge here, and I think Attorney Bornstein, hit the nail on the head. He talked about, what's a bridge too far? He was speaking of the case that you heard described to you where, there was a requirement that an easement be granted to an applicant to facilitate the creation of affordable housing development, and the court determined that that was a bridge too far. It was asking more of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The HAC required more of the Zoning Board of Appeals than was authorized under state law, state statute, state regulation. What we have here is a set of facts and circumstances that I think are far more extreme than any of the cases that have been decided. The cases that speak to the authority, let's say, the town meeting has, and the authority of your board to circumvent or to overrule or to act in the stead, in place of town meeting, these cases are based upon facts that are far more simplistic than the facts we have here. Here we have water and sewer service. So with respect to water, you've got the Lunenburg Water District. You've got a property that is before you that is not even in the district. Not a circumstance where it's in the district and it's seeking an extension and you're being tasked with granting an extension of water service, whether it be a connection or an extension of the existing line to a property within the district. If those were the facts and circumstances, I might be giving you slightly different advice about your obligation, for better or for worse, to act on behalf of the water district. Similarly, with sewer, we're dealing with a property that is not within the sewer service area. So again, you're being asked to authorize not a connection or an extension of sewer to a property within the sewer service area. You're being asked to grant an extension to a property that is outside of the sewer service area. So when these references are made to cases that deal with the authority of the Zoning Board of Appeals to act on behalf of the water district or to act on behalf of the sewer commission, you're not really being asked to do either of those two things here. Let's look at the enabling legislation. So the water district in Lunenburg was created by Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1939. It's an old district. And the Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1939 specifically say that the Lunenburg Water District is comprised of certain area that is bounded and described as exists within the legislation. And then it goes on to say the only mechanism, the only manner in which the water district can be expanded is through action of the district. The district functions like the town does. They have district meetings, much as the town has town meetings. And the district gets to take certain action. Only the district can expand the boundaries, the jurisdiction of the water district itself. Similarly, with respect to sewer, Chapter 185 of the Acts of 2010, an act relative to sewer service area for the town of Lunenburg. Let's look at some of the quotes from this special legislation. It defines the boundaries of the sewer service area and says, and I'm going to quote, "No person shall extend or construct a sanitary sewer intended to be connected to a municipal common sewer to serve property or any portion of property located outside the designated sewer service area." No person. And later it says, no property or portion of a property located outside of the sewer service zones shall be allowed to extend or construct a sanitary sewer. So once again, the sewer commission has no authority to allow a connection outside of the sewer service area, to allow an extension to property outside of the sewer service area. How does that occur? It occurs through town meeting action. And so the legislation goes on to say that by vote of town meeting, so we're not dealing with a question here of whether you can act, and I think Attorney Bornstein concedes this to a certain extent. You're not being asked to stand in the shoes of the sewer district, at least not initially. You're not being a sewer commission. You're not being asked to stand in the shoes of the water district initially. You're being asked to stand in the shoes of the district voters acting through a district meeting, or the town meeting goers, the citizens of Lunenburg at a town meeting, to expand either the water district boundaries or the sewer district. So when we talk about case law, there's no case I could find. I don't think there's any case Attorney Bornstein could find. I think he would have cited it, with facts that are this extreme, where we're dealing not just with the question of the extension of a water or a sewer service line within the boundaries of the district or within the boundaries of the sewer service area, and you're being asked to grant that permission. You're being asked to initially determine that the district boundaries are something that they're not. You're being asked initially to determine that the sewer service areas or boundaries are something different than they're not. And then once you make those determinations, then you're being asked to take the second step, which is to then issue the permits or approvals that would be issued by the water district or by the sewer commission to allow for the extension of the lines within the district or the sewer service area that you've just created. So I think that that's a more extreme set of circumstances. Now, I've conceded in my letter today, which you'll read when you see it, that the Housing Appeals Committee has not been a friendly forum toward zoning boards of appeals. There's no question about that. It's always an uphill battle for municipal zoning boards of appeals, whether they're defending conditions of approval or they're defending comprehensive permit denials. It's generally an unfriendly forum. There is significant weight given to the presumptive need for affordable housing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so in light of that, the term local board has been interpreted broadly, and there is potential, and I owe this to you, advising you as your counsel, there is potential that the argument I'm making, that these are extreme circumstances, far more extreme than the cases that guide us, and that these circumstances therefore potentially justify, and I'm not guiding you toward a denial necessarily, but potentially justify a denial, or at least a refusal of the waivers that are being requested of you. I can't guarantee for you that that determination would be affirmed by the HAC, or by the Superior Court, or by the Appeals Court, or by the Supreme Judicial Court. That's an unknown. Again, I've not found a case, I don't think Attorney Bornstein has either, that has these extreme circumstances. He likens it to other cases that bear some similarities. For example, he cited to the case, at this point 50 years old, that allowed for the Zoning Board of Appeals to act to allow for an extension of a sewer service line in lieu of requiring town meeting approval. There's no indication that that case is from 1976, I think. It's a Supreme Judicial Court case. The underlying decisions of the Superior Court, and before that the Housing Appeals Committee, are not published decisions. I've been unable to locate those. I don't know what they say about the location of that extension. But I think that it's important for the board to sort of understand that the nature of Chapter 40B, the nature of attempting to interpret what you can and can't do, is only as good as the case law that provides you with guidance. I'm not as confident as Attorney Bornstein is that the requests, the waivers he's seeking, are justified by the case law. My last point, and then I'll stop talking, is that is the one that Attorney Bornstein touched upon, which is the intermunicipal agreements. He doesn't address those in his letter to the board. I mentioned them briefly at the conclusion of my letter because I referenced them in my letter to Mass Housing back in September of 2021. I don't think that there's any disagreement that intermunicipal agreements are contractual in nature. So certainly if this board is performing a regulatory function, we can argue, and we've been arguing, about the authority of this board to how far can it go? When is it a bridge too far with respect to exercising regulatory authority? Entering into an intermunicipal agreement is contractual authority. It's different than regulatory authority. I don't think there's any argument that the Housing Appeals Committee could authorize, or that the courts would authorize the board attempting to negotiate contracts on behalf of other municipal boards, commissions, committees, even those referred to as local boards in the state regulations. So that is a question that needs to be answered by the applicant. It's a question that you may solicit. You may seek to solicit additional information on from the powers that be in the town of Lunenburg concerning the extent to which the IMAs would need to be amended or modified, because if they don't provide for sufficient capacity now, and it's my understanding that they don't, that'll be problematic for the applicant, and that's something over which, in my opinion, the board has no authority.
Thank you.
Could I ask the council one question?
You may, yes.
So what limited case law there is with the Housing Appeals Committee, was there talk of the fact that if it was a legislative directive, that the local zoning board would not have an authority to act legislatively on a legislative matter?
So unfortunately, it's not that simple. So there are instances where the authority is dictated legislatively, where nevertheless it is the responsibility of the Zoning Board of Appeals to act in place of what are otherwise defined as local boards. And in fact, there's a reference in the definition of local boards that even in instances where these other boards, commissions, committees, or districts are created through special legislation, the power still runs to you as a Zoning Board of Appeals to issue those local permits. There are instances, and this is the line of cases that Attorney Bornstein, I think, was making reference to. There are instances where the authority is statutory. The authority is part of a state scheme where the courts have said, though this is not a local body that is exercising traditional local powers. It's implementing a state scheme, and as a consequence of implementing that state scheme, the ZBA doesn't have the authority to implement state law and therefore doesn't step into the shoes of that other local board in implementing the state scheme. I think the argument being made, I know the argument being made by counsel for the applicant is this is not part of a state scheme. This is a water district that is unique to the town of Lunenburg or portions of the town of Lunenburg. This is a sewer commission that is a municipal body. It's the Lunenburg Sewer Commission. And so even though they're both created by state statute, by special legislation, nevertheless, the applicant's argument is that you have the authority to act on their behalf. But again, I think that you've got to take a step back because that's not what you're being asked to do initially. You're not being asked initially to act on behalf of the sewer commission or act on behalf of the water district. You're asking first, you're being asked first to act on behalf of the voters of the district and the voters of the town to expand the very jurisdiction of the district and the commission before you then step into the shoes of the district and commission and issue the permits that they would be otherwise issuing.
But the applicant went to the water district and was denied, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
No, I want to open this up. I want to open it up for discussion with the board. Tonight, questions you have for either attorney, like you had, anything, comments?
So I like to get
You
clarification.
have feelings, actually, you could tell me what you think, tell us what you think.
I'd like to get clarification on my question, of whether the applicant is requesting a new district or whether they're just looking for service for this 40B project. That's very important as we look at this. Because one of them is requiring, I look at that two different ways. One of them would not allow any residents to hook up to it on that 3-mile stretch, nor would any residents other than that 40B be allowed to use it, and the other one needs to, would require that everybody open it up. So, I mean, before we even look at it, and I think this I'm asking because, and this is behalf of the Water and Sewer District also, is that they fully understand what's being asked. Are we being asked to reshape the whole district, or are we being asked to supply water and sewer to one bill, to one project?
Okay.
Can I answer that, Mr. Chairman?
That's the only one that could.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I think that's a really important point to make. And I think it gets a little bit to Attorney Costa's point as well. I think he's overblowing what we're asking for. We're asking this board to dispense with the obligation of getting a vote from town meeting or getting a vote from the water district to run a line out to this project. So we're not actually asking you to necessarily expand the district in either case. We're asking for approval to extend a line to this project, not to create a new district or even necessarily to expand either of those districts. But like the Supreme Court dealt with in the Maynard case, we're asking you to dispense with the obligation. In that case, they didn't get a town meeting vote, and the zoning board wasn't told to act like town meeting. What the Supreme Court said was that the board had the authority to dispense with the obligation. And that's what we're asking this board to do, is dispense with the obligation. Now, I suspect the applicant would be willing to install a line. Remember, this is all at the applicant's expense, design and construction. I suspect the applicant would be willing to install a line that was capable of serving your neighbors who live along the location of the line. But we're not, that isn't a necessity of the project. It's not something we're necessarily asking for. It would seem to be an appropriate amenity to possibly require of the applicant, but not necessarily required as part of, to support this project. Our need is to have service to this project, and that's it. And I think that's all we've requested in our application. And I think that distinction might even answer the concern about, and I actually think this board absolutely has the authority to act as town meeting or act as the water district voters to do a thing which is typical and usual local service, which is providing locally provided utilities to a parcel of land. But that aside, we're not necessarily asking you to take that authority. We're asking you to dispense with, to give us a waiver from the need to get those votes, which would then allow for the run of the utility lines to the project site. And just to be a little clear about like what we're actually asking the zoning board to do, we're not asking you to design that. We're not asking you even necessarily to review that design. That review would, I think that the detailed design of those lines is actually something that happens after the comprehensive permit is issued. It's probably done through the staff of those, of the water and sewer, I'm going to call them departments because I think that's what they are, but through the water and sewer departments. I think the same people who review every other extension, I think they're involved in that process. I think we have an engineer that designs the lines. We've already surveyed the full run of the lines to make sure it's feasible. And then they would have review and they would have a peer reviewer, and that would all be part of the building permit process that's post comprehensive permit. All we're asking you to do through the comprehensive permit is open the door for us to allow us to do all those things and design a proper line and make sure it meets all the requirements and is safe and provides the utility service that's necessary for the project. One thing you might consider when you're considering that waiver is whether you consider a condition that requires service stubs to be installed on that line, or for that line to be capable of serving the neighbors who will live along it. But that's not necessarily what we're asking for.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I don't know if my question was answered to this point, because I feel like just to clarify, I'm understanding that that all that's being asked for is a water and sewer line to service 200 units only, and that water and sewer line will not be expanded to anything else. That's one, so that therefore when you're going to Leominster to request more capacity, you're requesting a certain amount of capacity for that line. And there's no intent to have that line be expanded to anything else past that. And this is just for a clarification for understanding for the, I don't necessarily, I'm not making a determination whether or not we can grant it, but I'm saying for the, when we approach of the Water and Sewer Commission, we're trying to understand what we're being asked of us. So is that the intent? The intent is only these 200 units, nothing else. And I need that in like a simple yes, no is all I need.
Okay, I'm gonna come as close as a lawyer can to that. Simple yes or
Well,
no.
it better be a yes or a no, because otherwise we're gonna go do this again. Because that's what I think is very important to the people and to this town, and it's critical to this town, because, we are paying, this is an obligation that we have as a town. And it's not, it makes it economically not feasible for the town if the answer's, if it's not taken the right way.
The only reason I say that, what I said just now, is because you've embedded like a couple questions on top of each other, and I want to either answer yes or no.
I'll make it as simple then.
Yeah.
The simple question is the intent of this line to service only those 200 units?
That's the only approval we're asking from this board, yes.
Now, that didn't answer the question. Is the intent of the line to be only for those 200 units? That's it. It's a simple question. It's not, that's what you're being asked. I'm asking, is that the intent? Or is the intent that this line could be used at another time for more than that? And because that opens it up to a lot of other things in this town. And I think this is important for the Water and Sewer Commission or whoever else that we consult to have this information. So it's a simple question. Is this for 200 units only to make this project economically feasible?
Yeah, I think that's all we can ask for in this process, so
Okay,
yes.
so
yeah.
therefore this line can never be used for anything more than those 200 units.
The answer to that question is no, because the Water and Sewer District or other mechanisms could require it to be used for something else. I don't have control over that, neither do you. But what you do have control over is whether you can dispense.
That's not what you asked us. You asked us to have control over that. You asked us to have control. You asked us to have control over the Water and Sewer District to make this project economically feasible, to create a line for this project only. And I'm asking if that's what you are asking. If it's for, this line is for this project only, because other than that, I don't feel it's in our perpetuity as a board to be able to create a new district.
Oh, I agree with that. And that's not what we're asking. Yeah.
I have every intention on tying houses in along the way. It makes no sense to put 3 miles of water or 3 miles of...
You have to come up, give your name and address, and speak at the mic, please.
My name is Kevin O'Brien. I am the applicant. What I have discussed in the last 15 years with dealing with this project is anything that gets put in out there, common sense would say to put it in so everybody can benefit from it. We talked about it with the planning board 10 or 12 years ago when Dawn wasn't even involved in it. We talked about the betterment charges of all the people paying for it when when the sewer or water went by them. There's not going to be any charge to anybody because I am going to be paying for it. So in answer to your question, that whatever the board, whether it be the water department or the sewer department, if they require us to put stubs in for all the houses that we go by, we will put the stubs in for all the houses we go by. Now then there, we're going to have to talk about how much more flow there is. That again, as I think Dawn said, is if you give the approval on this, we go to the next step and we deal with those departments, I believe, separately.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, then you're asking us to create a new district, to expand the district.
The water district is already on my property. The property out there, the water district goes back 500 feet on the right-hand side of Howard Street. So it's already in the water district.
Then I don't understand why, then if it's already in the water district, why are we going 3 miles?
Because there's no water to the district. There's no water to the property.
And is it part of the sewer district?
No.
I don't think so.
All right, just get it.
The sewer district, I think it's something with the, in need, or the department or the area in need, is
Okay.
what I think the way the sewer looks at it.
Okay, like I said, I'm looking to just get clarification, to understand the whole scope of what I'm being asked as a board member to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments from the board as of right now? Just, where your thoughts are, where your feelings are? Is this a bridge too far for us to act for the voters of the town? Which is, I believe.
I'd like the sewer commission to just weigh in on it. My understanding is that if a sewer line goes by someone's property, they have the right to tie into that. So sort of what the
I
applicant was
believe they
talking
do.
about. So now you're not only expanding sewer to the applicant's development, but then now you're developing all along the sewer line for 3 miles, which isn't accounted for. So I'd like just confirmation that yes, even though they say they may want to run a dedicated line to the project, could we condition that the the size of the pipe, and whether it be water or sewer, it can only be dedicated for those 200 units in perpetuity and not be expanded. So I'd like at least the commission, the sewer commission, to weigh in, and if that line goes 3 miles from wherever they have to connect into, who's responsible, who has to pay that? I mean, eventually, yeah, the applicant is
Right.
creating, development as he goes along to his development.
And if there needs to be pumps or anything like that, who pays for the upkeep of the pumps?
I mean, it's,
We do have feedback from sewer commission, which we read the actual. There are a lot of concerns they have listed. And also you got a new table because they updated some of the things and some of the fees. Some things were incorrect. So they've corrected them and resent it. So I know that you're probably not prepared right now, but we do have this. We can talk to the sewer commission again on all of this. Right now, like I say, do we have the authority?
well, I think the case law that at least when, last time when the sewer commissioner, or sewer commission gave us that document, that was, I think, related to the easement, of the HAC. But I'm just be curious, can we dedicate a line just for that development without expanding, access to property owners along the line? And I don't begrudge the other neighbors who live on that, because why wouldn't you connect into it? No more septic, you could have sewer, but that has its own implications, and I know we are only discussing this, but I'd be curious whether we, even from town council at some point, whether we can restrict that flow and the amount of water and sewer that's leaving that site and only for that site. Similar to what they did at I know that they did the same thing at the mobile park, right? They have a dedicated line from town, wherever it was, to the mobile park, because they needed, so it has been done, but this is a little different.
Yeah, it's quite a bit different. Okay, again, any other comments? Any other
I just have
direction?
one question, maybe for Mr. Costa. With all the authority talk, I don't know if my head will fit through the door, but is this an all or nothing, vote? I mean, can we condition things
I'm not
to
gonna ask for a
say?
motion on this right now, I just
No,
want
I'm like,
feedback.
at the end,
Yeah.
does this
okay.
whole thing, like, if you say, okay, we are stepping in the place of, town meeting as an appointed board, but can we say, oh, but it needs to do this or that, or is it a yes or no from us?
So the requests that the board has received are waiver requests. And as I mentioned before, it is typically my advice, and it continues to be my advice, that the board not act on waiver requests until the latter part of the public hearing process, because you need to have all the information before you can adequately judge the waivers. I suggested at the outset of this process a month ago that maybe we consider water and sewer a bit earlier on. And by consider water and sewer, I really meant the waiver request for the connections, the extensions of water and sewer service, because I understood the applicant's position, and the applicant's counsel has confirmed it tonight, to be that without water and sewer service, their project is infeasible, uneconomic. I don't recall the exact term used by the applicant, but that those are essential components of the proposal before you. And the board's position generally on water and sewer may guide the remainder of this process, or the applicant's willingness to engage in peer reviews of certain components of the project if it knows it doesn't have water and sewer. What will the applicant do with that information? Will it consider the alternatives that it's currently saying to you are infeasible, like on-site treatment of sewage or use of wells? Is that possible? I don't know the answer to that. That's for the applicant to decide. But in terms of, is it an all or nothing proposition, eventually it will be, because you're going to be asked at the conclusion of this process to either issue or deny a comprehensive permit. And if you deny the comprehensive permit, you have to justify the grounds for denial of the permit, each and every ground upon which you intend to rely, because those will be reviewed on appeal if the applicant chooses to appeal the denial. If you choose to grant the permit, well, then you're going to need to act on each and every waiver and either grant or deny each and every waiver, as well as condition the project. The last 40B proposal that I assisted a board with, we had somewhere in the vicinity of 70 conditions. It went on for the better part of 20 or 25 pages. So these are comprehensive decisions that need to be carefully conditioned. So it'll be all or nothing in terms of a grant or a denial, but it's much more complicated than that because of all that goes into whichever of those decisions you make as a board. And water and sewer are critical aspects of this project as I understand it.
Thank you.
So I guess that, if I'm right, I think the question before us is basically, do we have the authority to not act as the sewer commission and the water district, but in my opinion, override the voters of the town at town meeting and in deciding whether we have that. And we can waive that condition.
So, Mr. Chair, in regards to the sewer, I'll just look at the sewer, because that's, at least it's the way it's been explained to me, that's pretty cut and dry. To me, I'm being asked to not, it's not part of the sewer district or anything thereof. So I'm being asked to create something that I do feel is over and above what this board is allowed to do. That the sewer district was created for a certain purpose, and that it should not be this board who has the authority to create or alter the district, because it affects more than this project. It affects everything in between. And that's just how that's my opinion, my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the subject?
I mean, we're not voting tonight, correct?
No.
I just think that I'd feel more comfortable hearing from the sewer commission and the water commission. But I think, again, time is of the essence. And so I think, we shouldn't dilly-dally about, obviously, their project may be uneconomical if they don't get the water or sewer. And I'm sure we need to figure that out sooner rather than later to give them a direction.
That's why we're having it this early, and you are correct.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a comment and maybe a recommendation for the board. So we've received, the board has feedback from the sewer commission already at the first session of the public hearing. I have a copy, and it occurs to me now that I'm not sure I heard the chairman reference it or review it, maybe because we were focused on traffic at the time, but I do have a copy of an October 6th letter that was among the various submittals for today's meeting from the Lunenburg Water District. I don't know if the applicant has it. I don't know if the board has it, but it was, I thought I had seen it, so I went back and I found it in my emails from last week. And this addresses the concerns of the water district and indicates, and I have no direct knowledge, I relied upon what was relayed to me by the water district, and so I don't want to refute what Mr. O'Brien has stated, but this indicates that the project is not located within the boundaries of the Lunenburg Water District. So what I might suggest to the board is between tonight's meeting and the next session of the next substantive session of your public hearing, you solicit feedback from the water district, or you review what the water district is relying upon to state that it's not within the district, and compare that to the representations made by Mr. O'Brien tonight. And then with respect to sewer, you solicit further feedback from the sewer commission based upon the questions of the board. I can tell you from a legal perspective, and I think it's what you heard the applicant say tonight, that all the applicant can ask for, in as much as it's seeking a waiver under Chapter 40B, is a waiver for its project. The applicant can't seek the creation or extension of the district, the creation of water service for properties beyond its project under the 40B umbrella, when the 40B umbrella covers only the project itself. I can't speak to the sewer district, to the sewer commission's position on whether it would then allow connections to this line running 3 miles from where the line ends now to the location of the project. That's a question for the sewer commission, but it's one that should be asked and one that should be answered, and I think that should occur sooner than later.
Any other thoughts?
I'd be willing to make a decision once we have the input from the sewer and water districts into whether, I think their waiver is valid and merited.
Okay. All right, so I think,
Open it up again. Open it up for.
yeah, I'm going to. Okay, so if the board's done, if there's any public comment,
Oh, I have one more question, Mr. Chairman. So have you even done preliminary numbers yet on what that would cost? Like, to run a sewer and water line, just out of curiosity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and those numbers have also been reviewed by Mass Housing, part of our pro forma.
Okay. Thank you.
what is that number compared to having to put in a sewage disposal or pond for fire?
Is he talking about the same numbers that are in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the numbers are in your binder. It's the pro forma that has the various line items for the project. I believe the two of them together are $4 million.
Okay.
And just so it doesn't get lost when we go to public comment, I would request of the board that you obtain for the applicant copies of the two current intermunicipal agreements with both Leominster and Fitchburg, and that we also be provided with information on usage and capacity. I've attempted to obtain those on my own and have been unsuccessful. Thank you.
Do you have those?
Do you get that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'll open it up to the public. Paula? Then I'll...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say that there's a sewer commissioner who is in the waiting room, if you could allow him to enter. Speaking as Paula Bertram, 312 Townsend Harbor Road, I want to speak regarding the waiver to act on behalf of the voters of the town of Lunenburg for a property that's outside the sewer district. The sewer district boundaries were established after a great deal of study and expense through a comprehensive wastewater management plan. I was a member of the sewer commission at that time, and I am painfully aware of the intensive planning that went into that process. The goal of the comprehensive wastewater management plan was to address areas of need, areas that were unable to support conventional septic systems. I'm very concerned about the comment by the proponent's counsel to state that the proponent is simply seeking to dispense with a vote. I think this is a dangerous statement. The ZBA is being asked to act on behalf of the voters of the town of Lunenburg. They are being asked to act outside the foundation of our government. Our government is based on town meeting. In my opinion, this is absolutely outside the purview of the ZBA. As counsel indicated, no case law exists that indicates this is within the ZBA's authority. As to someone mentioned the Meadowwoods line. I was also involved in that as a member, as an employee of the Board of Health. That line was funded through a grant from the state, and there was a stipulation on the grant that that had to be a dedicated line. So that is why, that is a completely different set of circumstances. I would just urge you to carefully consider whether or not this is in the ZBA's authority. I firmly believe it is not. And as was stated, this is a decision that needs to be made because it will potentially impact the financial viability of this project. As to the financial viability, council just stated that the cost associated with this line, for both water and sewer, is estimated at $4 million. As an employee of the sewer department, I believe you have correspondence from the sewer department that identifies the fees, which are will be well in excess of the $4 million alone, just for sewer. As to the IMAs, I can certainly provide the ZBA with those intermunicipal agreements. And Dave McDonald, who is a sewer commissioner, was waiting to speak.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Good evening, Fran McNamara from the Water District Superintendent. Everything we do, my board always follows the enabling acts. I mean, he read most of them. So this is going to be difficult where the authority, who is going to give the authority or tell my board that the district boundary is going to be extended. So, I mean, this is going to be a tough little spot to, how you guys kind of tell us what to do, but I'm sure your council will guide us on that. So to be clear, the front of this property is in the water district. The back property where the units would be built is not. By enabling acts, they say we cannot supply water outside of our district boundaries, so this is where it gets difficult. We did, I think it was last January, we did attempt to put his property in the district. It was voted down. So we did, he followed our enabling acts. He petitioned the board, and we called a special meeting specifically for that. And so we followed it. We followed our enabling acts. So it's kind of, this is where it's different, where we're kind of going by the enabling acts, which is from the legislature. So it's tough. One of the big things with this project is the financial impacts of this. I know the fire department sent a letter for fire protection. That's also tied to what's on our side too. I mean, the water main that's put up to that project needs to be large enough to supply fire protection. The difficult thing is that the elevation of the base level of his land is higher than our storage tanks. So that means we're going to need booster pump stations to pump the water up, and the right way to do it is to put in a storage tank, which will provide fire protection to the fire department if it's ever needed. So the financial impacts down the road is going to be very difficult because all that, the pump station and the storage tank, is very expensive to maintain. I mean, we're looking at probably next year painting a water storage tank on Chase Road. We're probably looking at $1.5 million. So all the money that's generated from this project probably is not going to cover the expenses that's going to need to take place in 20 years. So it's kind of putting us in a tough position. So.
Okay. I have a question.
Sure.
At one of the hearing, it was Selectmen's meeting, I believe it was, or maybe it was the water, but you were talking about a well on Hickory Hills.
Correct.
And that it was high in certain chemicals and you needed filtration. That the well wasn't currently being used, but you wanted to do a survey and do a study. And I believe it was stated that the reason you wanted to open up that well was because the Keating well, if it went down, would not have enough, there would not be enough supply to the current water district, and that's why you needed that. So what would this project add?
That would make it even more difficult. It would make it more difficult.
So if the well at Hickory Hills, if it doesn't go, are you saying that you may not be able to supply the water? I'm just saying under a scenario that I heard where if one well went down, the Keating well, that you wouldn't be able to supply the current.
It would be difficult for long-term period. Lancaster Ave wells can maintain for a few days during the dry summer like we had this year. Lancaster Ave would have a difficult time for substantial more than 3 days. The big thing of us looking to do the treatment on that well is because that the new contaminant out there, the PFAS, it's a huge thing going on, and the funding available is there now. So that's why we're looking at if we can get that well treated now. Funding is available. It is in our belief that the regulations, the amount of that chemical in the future is going to drop to a lower point where the other sources of Lunenburg are going to need treatment as well. And that's why if we don't have the Hickory Hills well online and one of those other sources do go offline, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to maintain adequate water supplies for Lunenburg. This project would not make that easier. It'd be just as difficult or more difficult.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just get clarification. You mentioned that part of the property is in the district. Is that the part where this is sited, where these three buildings will be sited?
The buildings are outside of the district.
So the buildings are outside.
Right. There was a housing project in the 80s. I think it was called Blueberry Hill. There was a housing project that was going to go around the golf course. So the district boundaries were extended for that project, which never took place. So that's why the boundaries are out on that side of Howard Street.
I'm just trying to clarify for myself.
Yeah, so he's outside of the boundary. So we would need, for us to do it by legal legislature regulations, the district boundary would need to be extended to supply his project.
Okay, so we are talking for the water as well as the sewer, for the water as well, that we would have to create a whole new district.
That's correct, yep.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, anybody else from the, yeah?
Somebody else, I think, took control.
Gotcha. But no, I think you need to open it.
Good evening. John Morielli, Senior, 8 Sequoia Drive, Lunenburg. I'd like to make a reference to Maynard. Maynard has filter beds so the sewerage connection was connected to that, and then I believe after that, after it was filtered, the town of Acton is connected to that end of town. So I'm not sure the case law really applies here, because last I knew, we don't have filter beds and we don't have waste treatment plants. So the burden, obviously, as you guys all know, is going on Leominster and Fitchburg, totally. So town of Lunenburg's gonna have to go to Leominster and Fitchburg and say, we're gonna dump all these cars on you guys. Can you help us out with our waste treatment? Doesn't even make sense. They hold the cards. I'm not sure, I agree with a bunch of you guys up there that I'm not sure you have the authority that they're seeking to overrule the water district and the 3 votes. We did 3 votes. I went to all the meetings. I voted in all of them. They were like 38-2, 40-1, okay, was what the votes were. Mr. O'Brien, what he said earlier was correct. In those meetings, we talked about other people on that route connecting. He said that in the meeting. We all talked about that in those meetings. What I took away from that meeting was he planned on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I took away, was that he planned on paying for the pipe going all the way up, people could connect, but the pump station up on Howard Street would be on his property. He would control the water to his project. In other words, we would sell them, the water district would sell him water, he would sell it to the people, okay? Which I'm not sure how feasible that is. I think the fire department would have something to say with that as far as hydrants are concerned and things of that nature. But I'd also like to know, putting the 40B project aside, how he would plan on getting water to the houses if the pump station is on his property. He can't run private water under town streets. Unless I'm wrong, those are gonna be town streets, that's gonna be private water. So there's a lot of hurdles here. And personally, I think getting more involved with Fitchburg, Mayor Di Natale already addressed water concerns with his traffic concerns, and
What I'm hearing tonight, most of it's going to Leominster now, because Fitchburg's definitely capped out. They get a lot of say in this, so
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
What?
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening.
Voice
Yep.
from above, yes.
My name's Dave McDonald. I'm on the Sewer Commission. I live in Lunenburg on 155 Allen Road. And I just have a couple of concerns and questions I'd like to address to the board. Okay.
Please do.
First one would be, and maybe Adam can help me out. I'd like to see a detailed scope of work that Dave Blatt and Mr. Chair, you brought up tonight. We're kind of all over the board on this. I would like something in writing from the applicant stating that he would like to extend the sewer district, because that's what we would be doing. And also a direct response to connecting in all the customers along the way. That's the first thing. The other one is I agree with Adam. We have to address the IMAs. Those are contracts that we made with other municipalities in the state. You just can't go in there and change them. And right now, we have to look at the capacities of those as well. So I think hopefully the engineers are going to start looking at how much capacity is going to be taken out of that project. The other thing is, we also have to look, and I know Paula Bertram's there representing herself, but I also know she worked on the CWMP plan back in 2002, I think it was 2001. That would have to be revised because we are creating a new district. There's no ifs, no ands, no buts. The other thing is, and I'm not speaking for the Sewer Commission on this one, but if we go with a direct line, I would say to Adam, sue him right away. There's no way that would be, I feel, allowed in this town. It's not fair to the residents, it's not fair to the sewer customers, and it's not fair to the businesses along the way. So that's my opinions. I want to thank you guys for doing this. I know you're in a tough situation, but we're all here rooting for everybody. So, and the last thing too, by the way, I like to see some sort of an engineer plan, anything from an engineer stating what they exactly want to do and how many pump stations and so on. So with that, I will let you guys go. I hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we've, yes.
Tom Alonso, 284 Lancaster Avenue, member of the Select Board. First of all, I want to thank the board this evening. I think there were some excellent pointed questions to the applicants and to our own town council about these authorities, starting from the fees, et cetera. I will speak to the water and sewer issue. I think it comes down to a simple matter, and I think it has been voiced already by several members of the board, which is, do you have the authority or not? And I think if everyone probably could agree that given the case law that was given, the answer is not clear. It's no definitive authority because nothing, as Mr. Costa said, points directly to this case. The extension of a line within a district is certainly a lot different than rebounding the district, and you would have to do the rebounding of districts in two regards, in the water district and in the sewer service area, both. And as Mr. Costa also said, you'd have to first put on your legislative authority hat, which is questionable at best, and say, yes, we redrew the lines, and then you'd sit in the other part of the seat and say, okay, now I'm the sewer commissioners and the water commissioners, and I'm going to extend these lines. That's before you even get the case of how much water, like Mr. Blatt has asked, how much water or sewer capacity are you doing? And that eliminates or completely ignores the last hurdle of the contractual one with the IMAs, which involve two other municipalities that would have to be overruled. So I personally think you don't have the authority, but really it doesn't matter what I think. It really matters what you think you have the authority to do. I will say that Mr. Costa was being kind when he says the Housing Appeals Committee is not friendly to ZBAs. I think they're siding in cases brought to them is somewhere in the order of 95% to 5% in favor of the developers. However, I think that's a different question. If the state wants to supersede total legislative bodies and ignore the ability of self-determination, I would argue, let them make the decision and not us if it's not clear that you have it to begin with. I think you have to go and look to people who are in this audience and or at TV, who you meet on the streets, who you meet in town, and say that I thought, with nothing really, I thought I had the authority. And I think that's probably something that is, to use the term they used before, a bridge too far. Now, somebody mentioned earlier the Meadowwoods project, which provided sewer to the mobile home park near the Shirley border. And I've been on the board when that happened, the Board of Selectmen, now Select Board. And I would say that that arose out of an emergency Board of Health issue. It was a sanitary issue that the current sewer, septic system, and water were not possible of being salvaged with a small lot, and so they couldn't fit water and sewer on a septic system on the spot. And the town, with the RDA, the US RDA, came with a grant that allowed us to do a specific site sewer, and that was only for that emergency service. So this does not anywhere parallel that. This was not the construction of a mobile home park or any other housing in the area. This was really to save people's ability to live in that area and not displace some 80 to 100 residents. So that was very different. One last point I'd like to make, Mr. Costa has made several times tonight that your waivers he would recommend taking to the end. I would agree that all of these waivers, including your decision on making a determination on your authority for the sewer and water district, be taken to the end, because I'd like to hear the construction process go through with engineering, because I think we owe it to the applicant and we owe it to this board and the people to say, we want to know in its entirety, what does this project entail? If you short circuit it, we're just going to head to court way earlier. And I think we want to hear what the project is, how it affects all the other components that the planning board and the other bodies who have given memorandums on this, how it affects those areas. So I would urge you to take it under consideration for yourselves and make those determinations later after hearing the engineering parts of this, because they might also give rise to other questions that may come about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? None? Is anyone else on Zoom?
Oh, just us and me.
Okay, with that, I'll cut out off public discussion, bring it back to the board. Have we beat this tonight? I think we're gonna get copies. Mr. Costa says that he has a copy that we haven't seen yet. Some of us haven't seen the copy from the attorney for the project, so I haven't seen that one. So we'd like to review them. I think that our next step is our next meeting date, I believe, is the 26th. Would somebody confirm that? And I think on that date, that's when we will, I believe we have a case. I'm not positive. I believe we have a case on that date.
So the 26th would be the next date. The 26th, I'm going to confirm, would be the next date. That
So
would
at
be
7 o'clock, I believe we have another hearing.
Okay.
But we will meet and go over our peer review, who we think we're going to need. In the interim, we can talk to some of the other departments and get advice and get exactly what we feel we're going to need for that. And then we can also schedule, I don't know, when the applicant, when will you be ready for another hearing after that date? The next hearing after that date, I believe, would be November 9th. Check that, please.
Correct. That's the second, yes, that's the second Wednesday.
And Mr. Chair, my only comment would be if the objective on the 26th is to identify peer review consultants, only to then give them their charge. I've been doing this long enough to know you're not going to have peer review reports back in 2 weeks.
No, I
So
just think that would be the date to pick the ones.
my thought was that you would pick the ones on the 26th, correct, at your next meeting?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, we could do,
So
okay.
once that gets done, you'll need to then give them time to complete their charge. Now, if the applicant has additional information to present on the 9th, I'm available, I'm happy to be here, but I just don't know that you're going to have anything back on traffic or civil engineering from your consultants within 2 weeks.
And what if the consultant is advising to increase the scope? Then we definitely wouldn't be.
Right, and that just goes to how much back and forth occurs between the consultants offline. Most boards authorize the consultants to
Yes.
communicate one to another. It may be that there's at least an initial round of presentation between applicants, consultants, and peer review consultant, let's say on 2 weeks after that, although I know we're running in at that point to Thanksgiving, but there could be some discussion at that point, and then if there are different additional revisions required to the peer review report, or to the applicant's report itself, that can occur during the ensuing weeks while you're reviewing civil engineering. So there are ways to juggle these things, but I just want nothing worse than convening the board only for us all to get together and realize we've got nothing to discuss.
Right. So on that date, that's what we'll do then. We'll do the peer reviews on that,
26th?
yeah, on the 26th. And I don't, as you said, Thanksgiving, the only date we would have in November would be November 9th. I don't know if that's too early to meet, a month away, or, 4 weeks away.
It'll be the Wednesday before Thanksgiving?
Yeah, and then the next one would be Thanksgiving, the day before, and
That sounds
we're not gonna meet on that date, so now you're into December.
Okay, all right.
And we are on a timetable.
Yes.
Can I comment on that,
You
Mr.
may.
Chairman? Thank you. So for the October 26th meeting, the applicant would ask that we be provided with copies of the proposals and scopes as they come in. So when we all get to the 26th, we'd have the ability to be in agreement on the proposals?
Correct, yeah.
So I'm hearing our goal right now for the next session is to have it on the 26th, have peer review proposals developed by staff between now and then, and as those proposals come in, they'd be shipped off to me fairly quickly so we can review them and attempt to reach agreement on all that on the 26th.
Right.
Great.
So I suppose, is there a need for a meeting on the 9th?
I think the only thing I could suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, is that while it might be nice to advise the public tonight when it is that you'll be meeting again in November, you certainly have no obligation to do so. The meeting you're having on the 26th will be a continuation of tonight's public hearing.
Right.
So technically, you can't continue it to a further date until that night anyway.
Right.
And maybe at that point, you'll have more information about what the consultants are proposing their turnaround time to be. Typically, that would be a component of their scope of services. So when you get together on the 26th, if your consultant says it's going to be 5 to 6 weeks, then you know there's no sense in scheduling a meeting anytime in November. Right. If the consultant says we can do this in 3 weeks, maybe you have a special meeting the week before Thanksgiving in lieu of your meeting on November 9th. But you can decide that on the 26th.
Okay. Sounds reasonable.
Mr. Chairman, just one last question. Do we have a statutory date that we have to render a decision based on when they submitted the application?
You do. So it's a regulatory date, and I will say, and I hope, the applicant or the applicant's counsel would concur that, generally if the parties are working cooperatively to complete a review, it is common, particularly in more complex projects, for boards to seek assented to, agreed upon extensions of the deadline if you're making good progress. Not the case if it's a obvious denial, the applicant's probably not going to grant you the courtesy. You have 180 days from the date of opening of the public hearing. So by my calculation, your deadline is March 13th. That's the date by which you have to close the hearing. You have 40 days following the close of the hearing to deliberate and render a decision.
Thank you. No other comments? With that, I will say that we will continue the hearing to November 9th. Again, it will, if we have another...
October 26th.
I'm sorry. I got the wrong, the 26th, October 26th. And we will have another hearing before that, but we will follow it with the peer reviews.
So would that be 7 o'clock, Mr.
That
Chairman?
would be 7 o'clock, and
Posted.
as soon as we're done with the first case, we'll go right into the peer reviews.
7:30 for the peer review discussion.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 I hear an aye down there from Patrick.
Yes, aye.
Aye.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Aye, aye, I did.
But the input,